The search for truth is an experience of the part searching for wholeness. It is a discipline of acceptance. Although the term seeking is the best we know, truly we do not seek truth. We accept, we receive, yet we do not find. All that lives and exists bestows something. Reality is forever flowing in and through all that is. The bowl is a symbol of the mental capacity to receive. Hence, the devout Buddhist may accept in it only that which is necessary for a single day, and nothing but food. Rice is the bread of Asia. The Christian in his prayer exclaims, "Give us this day our daily bread." The Buddhist mystic does not even ask. He carries the bowl, and those who feel within the impulse of the good law will share their rice with him. When food is offered, the mendicant may not refuse it. It is told of the Buddha Gautama that on his last day upon the earth, a poor farmer, out of the generosity of his heart, put into the Buddha's bowl a portion of his food. Due to the poverty of the giver, the food was spoiled, but the enlightened one received it and, turning to his disciples, declared that the time had come for his departure from among them. Then, knowing that the food was tainted but the best that the poor man had to give, he gravely ate it and died a short time after. The story is obviously allegorical, but the meaning is perfectly clear. To receive the law is to be fed. Through all that lives, the law is brought to us, and in any case and under any circumstance, we may receive the law and achieve liberation. The experiences of the day, the problems of life, karma, and dharma, all must be accepted into the ever-open bowl of the consciousness. No lesser object than food is permissible, but who shall declare what is or what is not food? At the end, experience is perfected in law. The one who has attained liberation turns the bowl over. When the law is perfected, then the time of receiving is past. Until then, the monk in his yellow robe wanders up and down the world carrying the bowl. Read over several times, thoughtfully, this section, giving special attention to possible double meanings. These cannot always be pointed out, or the discipline itself will fail. The practice of concentration should be limited to a brief period, with special attention to regularity and continuity. If realization cannot be achieved by adjustment, the extension of the discipline is worthless. The disciple should concentrate for not more than 5 or 10 minutes at any one time, once daily. Truth is timeless. The advisable daily period, then, is 5 minutes, a number mystically associated with the control of the 5 sensory perceptions. Either mornings or evenings are suitable times. The middle of the day or night is less favorable, especially in the case of the novice. Day and night are the yin and yang. Between them are the suitable times. The time, the place, and the chair having been selected, the mood itself must next be attained. The faculties of the attention must now be gathered up by a simple, direct, effortless technique. Under no conditions should the mind be made blank. Nor should the disciple wait hopefully for thoughts to think themselves. It is too soon for the law to flow in with the forms. The artist must first paint his picture of the law. Choose an appropriate symbol. This symbol will be your mandala, and in most cases, its cultivation will require considerable time. Do not be discouraged if it takes many months to clarify this symbol. Do not change symbols frequently, and never give up one design for another until the law has been found. The symbol may be an object, an ideal, or a pattern, but it must be capable of some definition. That is, it must be perceptible to the mind, if not to the senses themselves. Abstract virtues like goodness, kindness, or unselfishness are not suitable in themselves as concentration symbols. It is for this reason that in the Eastern schools, all of the virtues are pictured. Buddhism is personified by the Buddha, itself a personification of all of the abstract virtues of the doctrine. In Christianity, the perfection of Christian virtue is figured forth in the life, sacrifice, and death of Jesus the Christ. The teacher is not the law, but bears witness of the law. In concentration, the disciple cannot concentrate directly upon the law, but upon some pattern or imagery which bears witness. And he must never confuse the image with that which is imaged. Frequently, it is advisable to derive the concentration pattern from some phase of life which is pictorially meaningful. It has been pointed out that men often find truth according to the inclination of their tastes. To the scholar, his books are sacred. To the artist, the laws and canons of art represent his natural approach to the discovery of the law. The developed mathematician finds God in numbers, and the astronomer finds truth in the stars. Choose, therefore, as the first pattern for concentration, some form or device which has already proved to be an inspiration and has brought you some measure of realization. Thus, through the gateway of the known, you pass naturally and normally into the presence of the knower. There is no broad restriction imposed on the selection of the proper subject. If you have found merit in it, or have gained merit through it, it is proper. For the sake of an example, let us suppose that we are nature lovers. We have found inspiration and strength in contact with growing things. We have found the law in growth. We cannot concentrate upon the abstract principle of growth. Therefore, let us select some one growing thing as the symbol of growth, always bearing in mind that we are not limiting growth itself, but merely specializing it, so that it will remain within the boundaries of human comprehension. In this way, we shall escape vagary and indefinition, abstractions which in turn would lead only to involvements and platitudes. Of the growing things, a tree is one of the noblest and most complicated of all forms in the plant kingdom, and at the same time, the most symbolical. The tree, from time immemorial, has been used as a basis for diagramming many forms of human knowledge. In old prints and manuscripts, we find trees of law, trees of medicine, and trees of religion. Races frequently are represented in the form of a tree and its branches. Several of the old philosophies have represented the entire universe in the form of a tree. Reflections upon a matter such as this is a proper prologue to concentration. It posits the realization of self-unfoldment by disciplines of realization magnitude and reminds the intellect of the universality of the selected symbol. It is enough that a suitably symbolic subject be decided upon preparatory to the study of the following chapter, which continues the discussion of concentration. Pierce the form. The entire subject of this chapter is realization with the keynote, pierce the form, learn to recognize all ideas as essentially formless, but perceptible inwardly as manifestations of the law. When you read books, when you listen to teachings, when you contemplate the old wisdom, pierce the form. Ponder the words of Maimonides. Beneath the body of the law is the soul of the law, and beneath the soul of the law is the spirit of the law. Search for the spirit of the doctrine. Accept nothing less. In everything which occurs to you as incident or circumstance, recognize symbols of the formless. Realize that all visible physical bodies and all tangible conceivable forms of knowledge are indeed the many-colored fringe on the robes of the infinite. Remember the inscription on the temple of Sais in Egypt. I, Isis, am all that has been, that is, or shall be. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. Recognize the world as the veil, and realize that he who is entering into the hidden place must rend the veil of the temple from the top to the bottom. With the sword of insight, pierce the veil and find the law. An Eastern fable explains part of the mystery of concentration. It conveys certain implications that cannot be expressed in direct words. All spiritual values must be realized, inwardly comprehended. They cannot be communicated as mathematical formulas can be passed from one person to another. The emperor of an Eastern country built a palace which he called the House of the Singing Floors. When the palace was finished, he desired that gardens be planted about it so that the palace itself should stand in the midst of an earthly paradise. The emperor sent for the wisest and most skilled of his gardeners and commanded him to landscape the palace grounds. The gardener, who was very old and very wise, went out from the palace and, selecting a place nearby, built himself a crude sort of chair with a canopy of branches as a protection from the elements. The old man then seated himself there quietly. Summer slowly passed, and the man sat silently watching. Autumn came. The leaves of the trees changed their colors and fell. The birds departed. The clouds gathered, and at last the snows of winter lay upon the ground. Still, the aged gardener sat and watched. The winds whirled the snow, banking it up against the rocks. The trees bent under the fury of the gale, but the gardener merely drew his woolen cloak about him and reached for another steaming bowl of tea. Then springtime came. The snows melted, the little streams were filled, the squirrels came out from their holes, the spring flowers sent their green leaves through the patches of earth and melting snow. The gardener sat watching the motions of the seasons. At last, the summer came again. Having remained for a full year sitting in his chair of tree branches, the gardener rose, entered the presence of the emperor, and announced that now he would plant the garden. A year later, the earthly paradise was completed. Rare plants flowered on every hand. Curious fishes swam in the streams. Exotic birds nested in the trees. Little shrines stood upon the rocks. Old stone lanterns bordered the pathways. In all the world, there never had been so perfect a garden. When it was all in readiness, the gardener led the emperor out onto the broad porch of the palace and said to him, "O son of heaven, my work is finished. In every season and with the passing of every year, this garden will retain its perfection. As each plant grows, it will become a living part of a balanced completeness. When the leaves fall, they will form patterns upon the ground, and within the openings in the branches, you will see the snow-capped mountains. When the streams rise, they will form pools and eddies, each of which will become perfectly patterned with the rest. It is for this reason that I sat in meditation for a year. There can be no conflict here. Each passing season will express its own beauty, in winter, in summer, in autumn, and in spring. There will be always harmonious beauty. As your majesty advances in years, your tastes will change, but the gardens will grow also. As long as you live, you will find happiness in them. And when at last you return to the sky from whence you came, those who follow after you will find themselves in this garden as you have found yourself. I have built a miniature world that reflects the mysteries of a greater world. This, O Son of Heaven, is the wise man's garden. To every man, the fabled emperor is the self, the garden, his life, and the aged gardener, his wisdom with which he must build his earthly paradise. Wisdom opens the way and gives the example of concentration. The exercise and discipline of philosophical attention, which we call concentration, is exemplified in the gardener's year of meditation. Through the observation and consideration of all the universal processes which go on about us, we become aware of the ever-changing seasons of the soul. Summer changes to autumn, and autumn to winter, winter to spring, and spring to summer again. This mystery of change cannot be understood by the reading of words, but it can be felt inwardly as a spiritual experience during concentration. Not only must we focus attention, but we must sense as eternal truth the gentle flowing of time through consciousness. We grow, but in time toward eternity, gently, peacefully, inevitably. There must be no haste, no tension, no strain, and no striving. We must behold all things, value all things, feel our participation in all things, and from all these experiences, find the garden of our living. When we do this year after year, life after life, we understand. Tao, the way and the end in one, teaches that the method is forever flowing into the accomplishment, always. The things we do are becoming part of the thing we are. To understand this eyes concentration, not merely the concentration of the mind with its tendency to scatter its resources, but more completely to understand our relationship with life, so that the unity of our purpose is strong enough to bind all confusion together in one ever-flowing harmonious pattern. Sometimes, it is difficult to understand that concentration is not essentially an intellectual process. While the mind is the instrument of concentration, the exercises fail if they are regarded as directed toward mental control through effort. Also, it seems hard to understand that concentration involves the simultaneous activity of every part of the consciousness. There must be attention without tension. There must be feeling without emotion, visualization without fixation, and all must be bound together by an inclusive one-pointedness of purpose which does not include any inference of limitation. The process is more difficult to describe than it is to achieve, because it occurs simultaneously on different planes or levels. It depends for its success upon the capacity to realize the identity of the parts of one's own consciousness, for example, that feeling and thought are one, and that the things sensed are identical with the power to sense. There is no division between the flower and its beauty, the bird and its grace, or the river and its song. We may become aware of all values at the same time. This is properly termed spiritual perception. To the artist, the tree is form, to the woodcutter, it is fuel. The musician hears the rustle of its leaves. In it, the mystic sees growth. To the pilgrim, the tree is shelter. To the farmer, its fruit is life. To the squirrel that lives in its hollow trunk, it is protection. To the physician who makes medicine from its bark, it is healing. To the carpenter, it is walls and roof. The tree is all this and more to the sage in meditation beneath its branches. It is felt and known in all of its innumerable qualities and attributes. It is spiritual experience. It is law. It is God. It is truth. Concentration is the power or discipline by which all these values become simultaneously accessible as spiritual power. Most of all, it is realization. Truth brings to the wise man exactly what the wise man brings to truth. Therefore, truth is a sort of mystic fable, a living legend, which he interprets according to himself. Each finds in truth what he himself is. According to his own knowledge, he understands. Through the practice of concentration, the individual finds himself in all things and through all things. This is the reason why the old masters of the hidden road, as they were called in Korea, often gave contradictory definitions. Concentration, they would explain to their disciples, was a mental process. Then, in the very next breath, they would insist that the mind had no part in it. The very contradiction was part of the fable, part of the mystery. It confused the foolish, enlightened the wise. When Plato pointed to heaven as the abode of the gods, and Aristotle pointed to the earth as the abode of the gods, the confusion and contradiction seemed hopeless. Yet, it takes but a moment of real understanding to know that both were right, that all differences are proof of unity. The materialist will scoff and declare such reasoning to be little better than madness. But to the wise, the materialist is the maddest of all. Yet, the sage and the materialist are both right. Realization will prove this, for realization is forever finding the right and abiding with it. When you begin your practice of concentration, the rapidity of progress depends entirely upon the full understanding of what the discipline means. A bad start, that is, an effort inspired by inadequate comprehension, will result in years of comparatively fruitless striving. So, there should not be too much haste or too much eagerness. Success depends upon thoroughness of understanding. It is for this reason that these pages reiterate in several ways the basic concepts. If the foundation is right, all that follows will flow in the proper course. It may prove beneficial to consider your own personal proficiency in 3 basic capacities: your capacity to think in terms of spiritual realities, to feel in terms of impersonal participation in a universal sharing of life, and to visualize in terms of seeing values through forms. This probably sounds rather confused, yet it is a common experience that the normal individual at this stage of universal growth usually has a greater capacity in one of these qualifications than in the other 2. Some think better than they feel. Others react more correctly to visual stimuli. Try sincerely to strengthen whichever of these qualities seems the weakest in yourself. Your spiritual consciousness must be compounded from a balance of these 3 powers of your soul. The lack of one will unbalance the others and result in an imperfect approach. It is also true that any tendency to introvert, The degree to which we cut ourselves off from the flow of life in others damages our own sensitivity. All of the experiences of normal living contribute their part to our own soul power. If we restrict the flow of our own lives and narrow the sphere of our personal experience, we frustrate the universality of ourselves. This is a common mistake among metaphysicians. There is no virtue in aloofness. We are not greater or more dignified because we separate ourselves from others. Our true greatness lies in the nobility of discovering ourselves in the dreams and hopes and labors of our world. All of which means that the true concentration may be said to come about of itself. If we fulfill the law in living, the law sets up its own motion within our consciousness. We will then concentrate naturally as forms occur naturally. We will release soul power as the tree releases its buds and branches. Concentration is natural to man, but only when man himself is natural. Concentration is the next step in the unfoldment of the inner self. Man cannot cause concentration, but he can prevent it. Unfoldment, therefore, is not the forcing of the exercise, but the removal of the obstacles to a perfectly natural and beautiful process in the consciousness itself. If you can understand, you will do. Your action must flow from your understanding as from a fountain. At this point, little can be added to the discipline. You must find the way. But if you will meditate earnestly upon what has been implied, you will not go astray. If the words are not yet sufficiently meaningful, you must understand that consciousness itself is not yet sufficiently free from limitation of attitude and complexity to permit of proper concentration. Under such conditions, you must continue the preparational disciplines. Do not be afraid to admit insufficiency, but rather accept insufficiency as a challenge from reality to yourself, and without disappointment or regret, but with the deepest realization of universal wisdom, set yourself to the task of fitting your consciousness and your life into the universal plan. When the time comes and you are ready, you will know. Alchemy. The word alchemy is compounded from two words, al or el meaning God, and chem meaning Egypt. Literally, the word chemistry means the science of the Egyptians, alchemy, the divine science of chemistry, or the divine science of Egypt. Chemistry was identified with the Egyptians because among ancient peoples, it was believed that the secrets of chemistry were first communicated to man by the priests of the Egyptian temples. Alchemy is spiritual chemistry. It is the secret doctrine concerning the perfection of man, concealed under a terminology of chemical terms, allegories, fables, and symbols. Alchemy is an integral part of the European mystical tradition and also occupies a position of similar importance in the Taoist metaphysics of China. Many of the greatest of the Taoist saints were celebrated for their proficiency in alchemical research and experimentation. I have many times been asked why it was necessary or desirable to conceal spiritual truths in elaborate systems of fables and emblems. A student once asked me why it would not be much simpler and more helpful to leave all symbols behind and just explain the whole mystery at the beginning so that everyone could understand the facts themselves. By this time, it is hoped that you have reached the point where you will understand why it is impossible to describe any spiritual reality except in terms of symbolism. No one can describe growth without recourse to a description of something that grows. Spiritual realities are internal, formless mysteries, incomprehensible unless clothed in tangible lore. The fable becomes the vehicle of communication. A man crossing the void between one mind and another must be transported in some kind of container. The Buddhists call their sacred scriptures baskets. When you have received the idea and made it a part of yourself, you then may discard the basket. One of the saddest tragedies of mankind is that the average human being saves the basket and throws away the contents, or, mistaking the basket for the contents, he worships the basket, believing he is pious because he preserves the shape of the idea that has come to him, even though he is unaware of the purpose. Frequently, my students have objected to the extremely fantastic nature of religious and philosophical symbolism and fable. This wild extravagance of fantasy is part of a well-planned purpose. It is a constant reminder that the symbols obviously are too extravagant for literal acceptance by the thoughtful, that they conceal principles which are beyond the sphere of our physical and so-called normal perception. Take, for example, the alchemical symbolism of the unicorn. Out of fabulous antiquity has descended an account of a weird animal differing from any creature familiar to man. It was shaped like a horse, but had a cloven hoof. On its forehead grew a long, slender horn of twisted gold. The tail of the unicorn was similar to that of a lion, and its mane was of spun silver. It lived alone in remote parts of the mountains, and there was but one alive at a time. It endured for many ages, and permitted itself to be seen at certain intervals. The unicorn of European mysticism is the qilin of the Chinese, the lion horse with a single horn, a fabled animal that announced the birth of Confucius. How does it happen that two races dwelling on opposite sides of the earth should share a belief in this mythological creature? How beautifully the story of the unicorn fulfills the purpose of the ancient priests who devised it. Medieval zoologists frequently included the unicorn as an actually existing animal, assigning as its habitation some little-known and inaccessible place, such as the Sahara Desert. The museums of Europe include in their collections several drinking goblets that belong to feudal princes, which are reported to have been shaped from the horns of unicorns. Men wanted to believe that the fable was true, therefore to them it was true. There was no mystery to the unicorn. It was merely a rare creature, one that found its way into the heraldry of many nations and families, who bore the symbol but never sensed the meaning. The modern world gave considerable debate to this fantastic creature. One modern school decided that the unicorn was a highly glorified rhinoceros, that the single horn peculiar to this animal had given rise to a strange story in the disordered minds of primitive people. Still, the symbolism was preserved, and the modern scientist was happy at having solved the mystery to his own satisfaction. The alchemical book of Lambspring gives the key to the real meaning. The unicorn, with its one golden horn and living alone, is the human soul dwelling far distant in the impenetrable forest of the senses compounded from the numerous aspects of the anima itself. This white horse with the horn is a proper symbol for the most profound meditation. There is no way to tell its story to the foolish, nor is there any way in which its mystery can be concealed from the thoughtful. No man can describe the soul in direct and simple words. It is a subjective experience. But each man may restore for himself a certain pattern of the soul by meditating upon the appearance and temperament of this strangely docile animal, described by Basil Valentine as so shy that it runs before the hunter can reach it, so wise that it can never be captured in any net devised by man. A symbol of the soul must likewise be a symbol of soul power. The golden horn, never used to injure any creature but around which the knight-errant tied the silken scarf, is the power of concentration, the one-pointedness of the soul, the harmless strength of truth. But how could this be explained to men who would prize the unicorn's horn as a wine goblet? Whoever the initiated guildsman was who first fashioned that horn into a beaker, undoubtedly was acquainted with the mystery, for if there possibly could be devised a vessel to hold the mystic wine of the Feast of Cana, it would be the unicorn's horn. And so, the mystery grows, each part fitting into the rest, each circumstance conveying an inference that literal words can only crucify and destroy. As the soul must be sought in the farthermost and the innermost intricacies of our lives, so truth will be found hidden in the mystery of symbols. Symbolism is the old appointed way of telling the story. The universe is the first symbol, man, the most perfect symbol, and truth, the hidden reality behind all symbols. Realization. The alchemists belong to that group of mystics who are said to follow the cycle of the quest, that is, their symbolism is based upon a search for something lost or hidden. The Knights of the Round Table seeking the Holy Grail, the Illuminati seeking the Pearl of Great Price, and the alchemists seeking the threefold elixir, all belong to the symbolism of pilgrimage. Truth is viewed as separated from man by a strange, intangible sense of distance, a space of time or place that must be crossed. But it is a distance of becoming, a search for that which is farthest from the known, but nearest to the self. It is indeed a foolish mortal who mistakes spiritual distances for material intervals or permits himself to dream of reality in terms of place. Alchemy is devoted to the quest of three hidden truths, which are three concealments of one truth. The first of the veils is the transmutation of metals, the second the discovery of a universal medicine, and the third the creation of the elixir of conscious immortality. There were two kinds of alchemists. To the first, alchemy was a superchemistry, the transmutation of metals of physical possibility, and the universal medicine an actual compound against disease, the elixir of life, a subtle fluid which could prolong physical existence indefinitely. To the second kind of alchemist, the three quests were entirely spiritual, and were to be attained only through the practice of the mystical disciplines, of realization that had descended from the ancient rites of the Egyptian temples. In an old manuscript left behind by some unknown writer of the 17th century, a mystic alchemist sounds the note of warning, "Woe, woe, woe unto the gold makers." This is the burden of all alchemical writings. The fables are told, but woe to him who accepts them as the substance of the doctrine. They are but the shadow, the substance lies beyond. To the modern truth seeker, alchemy conveys the light of another facet of the philosophical diamond. It gives further instruction in the mystery of the search for the self. But first must come the mystery of the metals. There are two kinds of metals, the earthly metals and the philosophical metals. There is a gold that is mined from the earth, and there is a philosophical gold that is mined from the air. There is a mercury which falls from the rock, and a philosophical mercury that abides as a vapor in space. There is mortal iron and immortal iron. There is a tin in the earth and a tin in the heavens, a copper that corrodes and a copper that is incorruptible. There is a lead that is heavy and a lead that has no weight at all. In the formulas of alchemy, there are 7 sacred and profane metals, as in the formulas of theurgy, there are 7 parts of the soul, rational and irrational. The 7 irrational parts of the soul are the 7 base metals. The 7 rational parts of the soul are the 7 mysterious and perfect metals. Also, there are 7 sensory perceptions of the soul which extend outwardly from within to comprehend the order of the base metals. And there are 7 rational extensions of the soul which extend inwardly to contemplate the divine metals. In addition to the metals, there is vitriol, not the vitriol of chemistry, but the vitriol of the philosophers. It is the devourer of the metals, the slayer of the metallic souls. This vitriol is the indispensable solvent of the metallic principles. It destroys them as metals and mingles their essences. It dies with them and produces from their minglings the supreme mystery of the philosopher's stone. This is the stone Petra, the rock upon which must stand the temple of truth. This is the stone that the builders rejected, the stone that destroyed the giant of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. This is the sling stone of David, the white stone, the magical stone of the shed that gave Solomon power over all the worlds. This is the emerald of the Sangreal and the sapphire stone of the commandments. This is the diamond soul of the Tibetan lamas, the priceless jewel in the forehead of the Buddha. Words can but imply the meaning, for in alchemy, as in Oriental mysticism, we are dealing with wordless principles and nameless facts. But dimly, we may perceive or sense the majesty of the concept. Omar Khayyam knew the secret of the metals when he wrote, "The vine had struck a fiber, which abutif clings my being. Let the Sufi flout of my base metal may be filed a key that shall unlock the door he howls without." The mystery of the metals is the mystery of the recognition of the twofold nature of all consciousness, all form, and all thought. When the alchemist wrote, "You shall take 1 part of the philosophical iron and add thereto 3 parts of the philosophical mercury, and be sure that they have been properly distilled and augmented," he was using his own quaint, picturesque terminology to convey a truly transcendental secret. Those searching for the mystery of the inner life can use in their quest only the higher and most attenuated faculties of sense and thought. The ordinary human mind is of very little service, the human emotions of very little good. We must seek within and find the spiritual powers of the mind, the spiritual powers of the heart, and the spiritual powers of the hand. In other words, we must use only the spirit of the metals. It is useless to bring only the mortal perceptions and the mortal limitations to bear upon the problems of the immortal self. Our physical experiences are not enough, they must be distilled and augmented. Our physical education is not enough, it is but a base shadow of something greater. Our thoughts, our sciences, our emotions, our arts, our actions, our crafts are mortal and physical symbols of immortal powers. We must read all the symbols, we must seek all the shadows. This is the beginning of alchemy, that we shall discover our every word and deed to be but symbols, our hopes and aspirations only fables, our histories and traditions merely legends. All that we know, like the symbol of the unicorn, is an indication of that which lies within. The almost inconceivable reality beyond all our experience and all our knowledge is an essential subject for our meditation. It must be a very sane and gentle meditation. It must not lead off into absurdities, but lead inward toward reality. Of all the fables in all the world, we ourselves are the most fantastic. We are a creature stranger than any sphinx or chimera. The sphinx has the head of a man, the body of a lion. But what of man himself? He has the spirit of a god, the soul of a mortal, the body of an animal. He has dreams of space, the longings of the air, and the motions of the cosmos. Yet he is bound down like some Gulliver chained by Lilliputians. He is, of all creatures, the most mysterious composite monster that dream ever fashioned. In the ancient temple of Serapis at Alexandria stood a gigantic image of the weeping god. His body was fashioned out of the twigs and branches of trees. His hair was grass and grain. His eyes were precious stones. His garments were made of metal, and his body was overcloaked in the skins of animals. He was crowned with the feathers of birds, flowers bloomed in his hands, and insects gathered honey from his mantle. This weeping god upon whose headlight shone down through the open roof of the temple is man himself, the symbol of all nature, who bears within him all questions and all answers. Thus, we learn from the story of alchemy that each must gather the elixir from all the lives that make up mankind, and compound therefrom the elixir of his own life. From all the secrets that are man shall be fashioned the secret power that shall save man. Retrospection. Retrospection is one of the best known of all philosophical disciplines, the Pythagorean exercise of retrospection. It is recorded that the members of the famous school of Crotona practiced a daily retrospection according to a formula laid down by the great master himself. Retrospection is the mental process of reliving in reverse order the incidents of the day. The purpose of retrospection is to discover the moral weight of action. The average person passing through the experiences of daily living is only partly aware of the significance of passing events. Some of the most valuable lessons go unnoticed. Failure to heed and observe, failure to discriminate and place right emphasis, and most of all, failure to be thoughtful. All these shortcomings deprive the consciousness of the experience of action. The result is that much valuable time is wasted. By means of retrospection, we may live again the incidents which have occurred. We may view them impartially. We may read our own actions as from a book. It is possible to see in greater perspective the intimate relationship between cause and effect. Theoretically, at least. Retrospection enriches life, resulting in a greater thoroughness in thinking and feeling. More recently, the discipline of retrospection has been interpreted as a form of vicarious atonement. The person performing the retrospection sets himself up as a sort of judge and jury over his own actions. Reviewing the incidents of the day, he attempts to rationalize each of them. Subjecting his thoughts and emotions to a series of mental rewards and punishments, he sincerely regrets the mistakes he has made and with equal sincerity acknowledges and applauds his more commendable accomplishments. This technique is regarded as highly beneficial in neutralizing karma. Unfortunately, it does not appear that this form of retrospection was practiced by the Pythagoreans. So we have no rule of conduct laid down by the master in this particular. The practice of retrospection offers certain advantages if properly understood. But like most esoteric exercises, it has been gravely misunderstood by most of those who have attempted to use it. It is the natural purpose of the universe to keep the attention of man focused directly upon that hypothetical division of time which we call now. It is written in the scriptures, now is the accepted time, present action is the focusing of all the accomplishments and propensities of consciousness upon the problem of the moment. The now eternally is drawing out of man his resourcefulness, his courage, his integrity, and his understanding. What we call time is so illusional that many philosophers have come to the conclusion that of all the dimensions of time, only the now is real. Any exercises which lure the point of consciousness away from the now are dangerous to those who are not well grounded in the disciplines of realization. He who lives in the future abides in a vagary of hope. He who lives in the past lives in the vagary of regret. Both hope and regret are inferior attitudes as compared to the active certainties of the now. A man working with a present problem is gaining much more of soul growth than can be achieved by dreaming of unborn tomorrows or moping over dead yesterdays. When we become very wise so that we are untroubled by memories and are unmoved by repining, we then may find profit in the contemplation of our own misdeeds. Until such time as we have gained this philosophical equilibrium, too much retrospection is likely to prove harmful. There is a certain fatalism about the past, and so little can be done to unmake or remake that which already has occurred. As we have done, we have done. We may desire heartily and sincerely to take back the hasty words we have spoken, but we have spoken them to the air, and the winds have carried them far beyond our reach. We never can bring them back. The kindly deed we might have performed is useless now. The occasion came and went. Performed tomorrow, it will be useless. The opportunity for experience which was offered and which we overlooked has passed on to others. We cannot lure it back. All we can do is settle back in the midst of our realization of failure and disappointment, discouraged by the helplessness and hopelessness of our miserable state. This negative attitude robs us in a very subtle way of a certain vitality. Realization is not a discipline of repentance. It is a positive statement of conviction. It flows along the impulse to do and to be, and it has little in common with vain regret. It is better for man to search for truth than it is for him to wrestle with his errors. Another problem that arises with the discipline of retrospection relates to the implications of self-correction. Going through the experiences of the day, the disciple is supposed to administer his rewards and punishments according to the merits and demerits of action. This implies that the student knows what he should have done, and also that he knows what he should not have done. A critical survey in many cases indicates that true knowledge of correct courses of action is beyond the capacity of most students. Therefore, the judgments made during retrospection are opinions little better than the actions themselves. For example, a certain sect or school may teach that a disciple should eat only a certain kind of food. Quite thoughtlessly on some occasion, the disciple eats something that is not included in the list. Later in his retrospection, he realizes the enormity of his offense, enters into the process of self-chastisement, which involves deep repentance and devout assurance that his sin will not be repeated, and feels a tremendous sense of personal failure. Yet the truth of the matter may be that the group or sect which forbade the eating of the certain food was entirely wrong in its original condemnation. The dietetic restriction was not based upon a solid philosophical foundation, but upon the personal tastes of the founder of the sect. Perhaps this gentleman did not like onions, therefore he forbade his disciples to eat them. In just this way, the whole retrospective process becomes a vicious circle of misunderstanding and wrong emphasis, simply because the disciple does not know what is right and does not know what is wrong. In the deeper systems of philosophy, the old teachers would have said that until the disciple actually knows what is right, retrospection is impossible, and when the disciple does know what is right, retrospection is unnecessary. There is little virtue in a discipline that leads only to an inferiority complex. Retrospection arises in all instances where the element of forgiveness of sin is present in a religious system. Here there is some compromise of basic integrity. If the human being believes that there is any escape from the consequences of action, the standard of living will be compromised. Thoughtfulness must come first, not afterwards. A little wisdom is more precious than an ocean of repentance. To do what is right first is to be wise, and so it is the first duty of the truth seeker to search for the right. Having performed an action according to the noblest standard of consciousness, there is no cause for regret. If a mistake has been made, universal law will reveal it through karma. There should be thoughtfulness, but not overemphasis upon the daily process of living. Often there is conflict between the larger vision and the smaller vision. I know individuals who have been possessed by regret and remorse for the greater part of a lifetime. Such persons sing their vices but never have found their virtues. All too often, their self-condemnation is based upon hopelessly inadequate standards of integrity. They are blaming themselves for faults which either do not exist or which have been highly magnified by popular ignorance. In advising the discipline of retrospection, I recommend a specially modified form of the exercise. This would agree almost exactly with the original Pythagorean formula. Appoint a few moments at the close of the day, become silent, relax, and permit the incidents of the day to flow through you as a series of pictures. It is customary in retrospection to reverse the order of the images, moving backward from last occurrences toward the beginning of the day. This is done in order that the relationship of effect and cause may be rendered more obvious by observing effects first and then tracing the causes of those effects backward along the line of incidents. If the retrospection can be performed without any personal involvement, without any sense that the incidents are occurring to ourselves, the retrospection becomes philosophically useful. We should see not the weaknesses of ourselves, but the strength of the law. We should not see ourselves as poor mortal sinners forever wrestling with the hosts of evil like Jacob with the angel, but rather we should see law molding us eternally into the shape and purpose of its own reality. Instead of worrying about our own soul growth, instead of being possessed by the desperate delusion of growing, instead of longing after some Elysian field, we should become aware of the workings of an ever-flowing law by which all finite natures are being impelled and propelled. Law is real, we are not. Law is good, we are not. Law is immortal, we are not. This does not mean that we are worms of the dust, insignificant, unimportant things, beings to live in misery and despair. Rather, it means forgetfulness of ourselves. It is turning the effects of attention away from self-condemnation toward the face of fact. We know as a physical truth that he who forgets himself is happy. We are reminded of the biblical statement that the man who saves his life shall lose it. This applies especially in the field of religion. Throughout the whole world of belief, men are trying through their doctrines and their dogmas to save themselves. Through prayer and fasting, through rituals and dogmas with candles and pig-sides, self-centered mortals are bending to the task of saving themselves. Through self-depreciation, through self-denial, with flagellation and austerity, with gifts and offerings, the rich and the poor, the humble and the great are seeking divine favor, always for the same reason, always inspired by the same fundamental motive, self-preservation. The soul must be saved, and strangely enough, the salvation of an immortal principle is made to depend upon the ill-founded opinions of a frail and mortal part, the human personality. Men meditate to save themselves, and they practice retrospection to save themselves. Always they are thinking of the self, always plotting and planning for the self. The lay disciple, falling into one of these pitfalls of the way, comes inevitably to the dual conclusion that not only is he worth saving, but that he is in dire and constant danger of being lost. In this wild game of saving and losing, of being redeemed and then relapsing, the beauty and nobility of living, it is the purpose of realization that consciousness shall flow away from the personality toward identification with law and reality. Posit the real, not the unreal. This is not a platitude, but a great spiritual truth. This parable, which originated somewhere in northern Asia and traveled far to be incorporated in the Christian traditions, is a statement of realization. It is applicable to the daily life of each disciple. By it we should judge others, and by the same rule we should judge ourselves. This does not mean that we should continue to cultivate old faults, but rather that we should strive to cultivate universal virtues. We should not excuse our own mistakes, but rather we should see through them and realize that they bear witness to a failure of adjustment between personal and universal understanding. We should not try to correct faults one by one, but rather with single-pointedness search for the one realization and the one truth that in itself corrects all faults. Retrospection is serviceable if through the aid of it we come closer to the one. But if we are not more aware of good because of the exercise, then the exercise is not good for us. Any discipline that makes us feel our own inferiority is as wrong as one which makes us feel our own superiority. Man is neither great nor small. He is a channel through which eternal principle is flowing. He may think he is great, and then he truly is small. He may think he is small, and then perhaps he is great. But knowing he is a witness to a greatness that is not his own, which abides forever in the innermost and the furthermost, he is a sage established in reality. If the retrospection appears to the consciousness as a practical method of growing, it may be practiced sparingly, but it should never become a crutch or an escape mechanism, should never be thought of as a compensation for action or inaction. If practiced at all, it should be keyed to the realization of works. Through observation and attention, we should become more aware of the workings of universals through us and in us. If this is possible through retrospection, and the mind can protect itself from the processes so often associated with the discipline, then the effects can be beneficial. Usually, the discipline should be limited to from 3 to 5 minutes a day and should be practiced regularly immediately before retiring. The mind should remain impassive and entirely calm. There should be no emotional reflex of any kind. It should be an experience in which we become aware, but to which we do not react as personal beings. The mysterious order of adepts. The traditions of alchemy refer frequently to a mysterious order of adepts. It was believed of them that they possessed a complete knowledge of the mysterious elixir of life, could travel about the world appearing and disappearing at will, communicating their secrets to such as they deemed worthy. These adepts carried with them the powder of projection, which they called the red lion. A few grains of the red lion dropped upon a molten mass of crude metal would cause its instantaneous transmutation into the finest gold. According to one account, the powder of projection could transmute 100,000 times its own weight. This same powder dissolved in wine was the philosophic elixir, the universal medicine against all corruptions of the flesh. According to von Welling, a minute particle of this red lion, if placed on the surface of water, would begin to revolve violently, passing through all the changes and periods which occur in the formation of a solar system. In the majority of cases, those alchemists who claimed to possess the powder of projection had received either the powder or the formula for its preparation from one of the nameless adepts. It is not, therefore, difficult to understand the veneration in which the invisible brothers were held. The great number of stories circulated describe the curious circumstances under which the adepts revealed their secrets. Undoubtedly, it is true that advanced alchemists possessing profound knowledge of the universal mystery did wander about medieval Europe, but the accounts of the adepts, like the story of the unicorn, were philosophic fables devised to deceive the unwary into holding false opinions regarding the alchemical operations. The adept is the self, the divine principle that manifests within the human personality, the reality behind every man. This self possesses the true powder of projection. Wisdom, for wisdom and wisdom alone, can transmute all the base substances of human experience into spiritual power. The inward quest is the search for the self. The purpose of concentration is to discover the self. The end of all seeking after spiritual things is to be united with the divine part within. The conscious union resulting from the release of principle from personality, of the subtle from the gross, of the eternal from the temporal, is accomplished by means of the secret chemistry of the soul, the alchemy of the old world. Within each of us is the adept self, the rose diamond. On rare occasions, we glimpse for an instant the tremendous implication of the self, and we become aware that the personality is indeed merely a shadow of the real. These infrequent mystical experiences, these rare occasions when the sincere seeker feels himself to be in the presence of his own divine nature, were described in the old books as a visit from one of the adepts. In the extension of consciousness, which resulted from such rare spiritual experiences, came a newer, fuller appreciation of the mystery of the quest. The personality was instructed in sacred matters. It participated for an instant in a larger fact, and in this way came closer to the universal mystery of knowledge. The laboratory is life. The alchemist is the truth seeker. The formulas by which he attempts to control the metals are his disciplines of concentration and contemplation. The adept teacher is the oversoul, and the powder of projection is living wisdom, which transmutes all substances and all natures into the imperishable truth for which all the world is seeking. The transcendent personality. Illustrating a preceding chapter is a figure representing the creation of the transcendental personality within the consciousness of one who is concentrating. We turn now to consideration of the next illustration of the same series, showing the extension or multiplication of the personality into 3 transcendent attributes. These figures require understanding and thought. It is customary in Eastern theories of metaphysics to represent the heart as a shrine. Often this shrine is shown as a small Buddha-like structure within the breast. In some systems, especially the Buddhist, the heart is described as a lotus bud. When this bud opens under the gentle influence of the concentration, the seated figure of the meditating Buddha is found within. The heart is indeed a house of hidden places, the very sanctuary of the body, the symbol of the throne of majesty in man. It is proper, therefore, that this, of all the organs in the bodily economy, should represent the self, the reality, the most sacred part of the whole nature of the universe and of man. The purpose of concentration is to become aware of reality. When this awareness is achieved, it is described as coming to the one who discovers it and taking up its abode in his heart. The 3 transcendent attributes, the realization of the 3 states of the self, the highest or supreme state is that of Adi Buddha, the unmoved mover of the world. The beyond or intermediate state is Avalokitesvara, the realization of the one, the comprehender. The smallest figure is the terrestrial Buddha, the observer, the beholder of the unreal, the objective personality with its attributes. Actually, this is part of a symbolic story, but it conveys the idea. In China, the oversoul or the reality sometimes is depicted as riding on the phoenix. It appears in the heavens and flies rapidly from cloud to cloud. At last, gliding downward, it disappears into the body of the disciple where it sits upon the lotus throne in his heart. When this mystery takes place, a certain contact has been established. A bond has been forged between the personality and universal values. This reality within is called the transcendent being. It is man's concept of the universal being. It is not the pure universal substance, for the reason that the human consciousness is not capable of envisioning the absolute itself. The transcendent being is the absolute as we are able to understand it. It is the infinite made finite by our own perception, yet incredible and unknowable to the concepts of the uninitiated and the uninformed. To the degree that we are able to preserve and maintain the beauty, impersonality, and dignity of the transcendent being, to that degree we remain true to our philosophy and to our doctrine. As a mother carries her children within her body, so the disciple carries the transcendent being within his heart. It must grow up within him, ultimately to be born from him as a free and independent spirit. But the personality cannot survive the birth of the transcendent being. When the universal is born, the personal dies. It is written in the East that the mother of the Buddha lived but 5 days after the birth of her child. The transcendent being is the abiding presence. Once it has been realized by concentration, it dwells with the disciple. This transcendent being never questions, never speaks, never demands. It merely remains, waiting. Understanding increases it. Lack of understanding apparently causes it to diminish. But through this, it gradually strengthens, becoming ever more dominant. It is variously figured in Eastern mysticism. Quite often, it is called the Maitreya, the Bodhisattva, which is to come. In this aspect, it is the universal Messiah. This is the true import of the Messianic doctrine. The coming Savior is the transcendent being. In China, Maitreya sometimes is represented as a very rotund, smiling personality whose body seems to be perpetually shaking with laughter. It is a happy spirit abiding in man. There is nothing depressing or introverting about it. It is the joy of realization, the peace that truth alone can bestow, a fortunate and desirable presence, the coming of which is to be marked by appropriate rejoicing. The disciple, having envisioned the real, that is, having become aware of his relationship to fact, is said to have attracted the transcendent being. From that time on, the being grows with the rapidity of the evolution of the disciple. This is Jacob Boehme's tree of the soul, which grows up in the heart until it fills the whole world. Gradually, the transcendent being increases until man's personality becomes merely a dying atom in the substance of this universal reality. Man begins his growth as a lowly creature like an atom in space. In the end, however, he achieves space. His consciousness is identified with space. He no longer is isolated but encloses space within himself. In the Brahmanic books, Krishna is described as towering far above Arjuna, his faithful disciple. The transcendent being, Krishna, has in this manner so increased that in comparison to it, the personality of the human creature is as nothing. The development of the transcendent being requires many lifetimes to consummate its final emancipation in a life of realization. If I can convey in some way to you the meaning of the transcendent being, you will share one of the choicest secrets of Eastern esotericism. Here again, we can make use of a fable. Once upon a time, there was an emperor who longed to have a son. Although he had many wives, Allah, in his infinite wisdom, gave him no sons. So the emperor resolved to go upon a pilgrimage to ask the advice and guidance of a great and noble saint who lived alone in the midst of a deep forest. After many days of journeying and numerous hardships and troubles, the king reached the hut of the hermit. Here he was nobly received by the holy Sufi. And to this aged and learned man, the great prince of the earth told the sad story of his longings, of his desire that an heir might be born to him. The Sufi listened to the sincerity of the king's appeal and said, "You shall have a son upon one condition." "Anything that you ask," replied the emperor, "on behalf of my kingdom. By Allah, whose name be praised, I swear it." Within the year, a son was born to the emperor. All his people gave thanks, and the king was prepared to fulfill his vow. The holy Sufi came into his presence, and the emperor said to him, "Ask what thou wilt." The Sufi replied, "While I sit quietly in my hut in the deep forest, I wish you to remove the forest and to build in its place a great city so that without leaving the little garden around my house, I may see the whole world go by and be among the concourse of peoples." So the emperor built the city just as the holy man had desired. In the very midst of the city, protected by a beautiful marble dome, was the little hut of the holy man with its square of earth. The holy man sat and watched the princes, the merchants, and the travelers from all over the world pass up and down before him. Several years had passed when he sent for the emperor. "I have seen enough," the saint observed firmly. "Remove the city." So the emperor took all of his people and all of the merchants and their shops and the palaces and the gardens and had them moved. What he could not move, he deserted. And the holy man was alone again in the silence, surrounded by the ghosts of an empty city. This is the legend of Fatehpur Sikri, the city of red stone and marble that today stands deserted. But it is more than a deserted city. It is the story of the transcendent being. The emperor is the truth seeker. The son he desires is his own immortality, continuance of himself as a spiritual truth. The holy man is the secret doctrine, the wisdom which finally becomes personified as the transcendent being. The pilgrimage to the holy man's hut in the forest is the practice of the disciplines. The city that the emperor builds represents the cycle of incarnations in which the pageantry of lives takes place. The concourse of people who pass to and fro before the holy man's hut represents the various personalities that comprise the cycle of incarnations. The holy man's hut, around which has been built the temple with its marble dome, is the abode of the transcendent being seated in the heart of the city, spectator to all that occurs. The transcendent being demands, after the passing of many years, that the city be moved and deserted, so that it may be left to sit alone in peaceful contemplation, the transcendent being having come into complete rulership over the life. Finally, nothing remains but the transcendent being, a creature built from the noblest hopes and aspirations, which is the real self. The ego of the personality is dissolved in a universal essence. Man no longer lives for himself or by himself. He exists to fulfill the impulses of the transcendent being. He lives to bear witness to the will and purpose of the universal spirit that has taken up its abode within him. Through contemplation and concentration, it is possible to realize the transcendent being as very real and entirely substantial. It is a substance akin to the substance of a fact, shrined within the Holy of Holies of man's temple. The transcendent being becomes purposeful living, and the objective personality becomes its willing and obedient servant. I bow before the lotus throne, chants the enraptured Buddhist. He means just that. As a personal creature, he bows before the lotus throne of his own heart, where sits Sakyamuni, the light of Asia and of the world, the priceless jewel, the transcendent being. To feel oneself, or to realize oneself as the keeper of a sacred trust, is a great experience in consciousness. In some way, it adds to one's dignity, at the same time keeping one very gentle and humble. It is thus that each becomes his own high priest, his heart the altar, the transcendent being the God that dwells in the holy place. Religion becomes an intensely intimate and personal matter when the transcendent being is the direct object of all religious observance. It is the God which abides with man. It is not a God, but a ray of the God, the principle, the truth. It mingles through a mysterious alchemy with the mortal parts of man, though it is never limited or destroyed by them. It stands, has stood, and shall stand. It remains the silent watcher. It is not the voice of conscience, for it never criticizes, never blames, never doubts, never questions. Like the passionless face of the meditating Buddha, it sits in the heart and waits through the ages during hundreds of lives, unmoved and unchanged, with ever-closed eyes and imperturbable, passive features. It waits for the day of liberation. There is no hurry, for there is no time. There is no delay. There is only a timeless mystery waiting for liberation, waiting and yet not waiting, for here waiting has no reference to time. Timeless waiting is a mystery that is all wound up in realization, in the sublime secret of personal awareness. Of all the mysteries of Asiatic metaphysics, none is more sublime in its concept than the doctrine of the transcendent being, the ever-coming self. While man builds his own soul, he really is building the universal soul with virtues not his own. He is building virtues with wisdom that rises not in himself, and he is perfecting a wisdom apart from himself. All the constructive and creative powers which man expresses fall into his personality from some deep and hidden source. Their purpose is not to build his personality, but to perfect the transcendental being which, born in the manger, a symbol of its material environment, unfolds and develops until it becomes a world savior, truly the savior of each man's world. The genii. In the Taoist system of philosophy, the genii, that is, the intermediary spirits, frequently are depicted as riding through the air on strange, brightly plumaged birds. Such pictures convey a profound philosophic meaning and are part of the meditation symbolism. In the old mysteries, genii represent the intellectual extensions of the personality. For example, in the course of numerous rebirths, the self or oversoul gathers the harvest of experiences. Each life, with its sequence of incidents, enriches some part of the composite spiritual nature. In one incarnation, the emphasis may be upon observation, whereas another life may be confronted especially with problems of discrimination. When the sattva or self emanates a new composite personality at the beginning of each physical incarnation, that personality is composed of the substances of previous experiences. Thus, the personality may be regarded either as a single entity or as a compound made up of numerous separate and distinct experience sequences. When considered as a single entity, the incarnating ego is called the personality, but when considered as a composite structure, it is made up of numerous separate experience cycles, which have been named the genii. These diverse experience principles, riding on the brilliant plumage of the thought birds, soar about through space, flying up and down the world, each living out its smaller cycle within the larger cycle of the complete life. The genii are usually depicted as grotesque little creatures, somewhat human in appearance, huddled up in voluminous cloaks and robes, carrying or accompanied by the particular symbols of the qualities which they represent. The genii convey to the Eastern mind, by the manner in which they are drawn, a definite airy or unearthly quality. Their robes flow about them in whirls of color. They ride amidst the clouds. Frequently there is a humorous, mischievous look on their faces, and nearly always they convey the impression of traveling, with great haste, toward some strange undefined destination. The genii may be likened to vagrant thoughts. We sit down quietly to think about some serious or weighty concern. Suddenly, in the midst of our contemplation, our thoughts fly off to some entirely irrelevant subject. Then we must gather up our minds and start again. And even as our mental fingers reach out to catch the flying sprites, they slip away again with mocking smiles. As the Chinese poet said, the thoughts of men are ever escaping from the bondage of the will, longing to return to the sky. There is considerable difference of opinion as to the proper method of coping with the complex phenomena of the personality. It has been usual in the Western systems of philosophy to attempt to point the mental processes into a single power, administered by the dictatorship of the will. All of the faculties of the intellect must become one-pointed and one-purposed, having no freedom of their own. The result is a constant struggle in the self to reconcile the contradictions which arise among the senses and perceptions. The Oriental mystic does not favor this technique of development. Rather, he prefers to permit the consciousness to flow outward along the magic airways of the mind. In the imperial collection of paintings on exhibition in Peking is one which illustrates the Oriental viewpoint. In the background of the painting is a dim blue haze of distant mountains, symbolizing the unknown elements toward which all life is ever seeking to escape. In the foreground is a thought genie seated astride a heron. Beside the genie, holding onto the flowing robes of the little spirit, is the figure of a philosopher riding off to the mountains. The whole painting is one of joy and adventure. The reason is flying away on the wings of its own fancies. To examine the subject more critically is to explore into one of the deepest mysteries of the contemplative life. Philosophically, the personality is not one being, one entity, one principle, or one force. Each new personality that comes into birth is a gathering up of other lives of distant times and of diversified impulses. As the woodchopper comes home with a bundle of faggots on his back, so the body brings into birth a bundle of twigs, which it has gathered through innumerable incarnations. One of the great experiences of living is adjusting to the fact of internal diversity. Looking about him, man realizes that he is personally confronted with problems of adjustment. He must learn to mingle with the multitude of other human beings who make up his world. He must adjust to numerous temperaments, and he must develop patience, sympathy, understanding, and all those qualities by which contact with others becomes just and harmonious. Turning inwardly to contemplate the subtle mystery of himself, he again finds himself in the presence of diversity. His inner nature is not one, but many. If it were not so, there would be no richness to living. It is the manyness within himself which makes it possible for him to mingle constructively and reasonably with the manyness that makes up his outer world. Within each of us is a universality, and this universality makes it possible for us to sense or to be aware of the universality of space. The parts of man's consciousness bear witness to the parts of world consciousness. The egocentric philosopher dreams of the time when he shall be all-knowing. He is conceited enough to believe that from his mortality may be fashioned a vessel which can contain all the knowledge of the world. He always is trying to find truth within himself and to bind it there, but he has not yet advanced into the mystery of finding himself within truth. As surely as all of the laws and truths of life are represented within man, so man himself is part of all the laws and principles of life wherever they may be and however they may be manifesting. This brings us to a consideration of the extension of the personality along the lines of conscious impulse, the transcendent personality and spiritual alchemy. The transcendent personality is related to spiritual alchemy. Paracelsus, among others, refers to the mystery of the creation of artificial human beings. Such creatures were called homunculi, and usually are described as crystal-like in appearance and as produced by art rather than by nature. Art is always to be understood as philosophical discipline, as contrasted to nature, which more slowly accomplishes the same ends by the gradual process of evolution. The homunculi were said to be born within eggs of glass. Their food was the universal medicine. They might not be shown to anyone who was not initiated, and they continued to exist as long as they received proper nourishment. They grew like human beings but never became old. Although the homunculus is often referred to in alchemical writings, no tract containing any complete discussion of the subject is known to exist. As a result, this entire cycle of symbolism and the meaning which it conceals has for the most part been ignored. It is extremely difficult to explain the subtle process taking place within the unfolding consciousness of the developing mystic. It is evident that as realization increases, the personality undergoes definite change and modification. Through growth, each becomes a new or different person, yet the old personality is still present. Nothing is lost, but something is added. This new something is an intangible personality made up of understanding, appreciation, realization, and many other attributes of soul power. If the disciple progresses normally in his unfoldment, this new and transcendent personality becomes his true self, more real, more tangible than the temperament and character with which he was born. Most important of all, this transcendent personality has a freedom about it, a space quality. It is not limited by the habits, attitudes, tendencies, and characteristics which afflict and limit the mortal personality. This is the secret of the second birth. The transcendent personality is born within the consciousness of the mortal personality and grows up within the mind and body until it reaches a condition wherein it is capable of independent existence. Having achieved its maturity, the transcendent personality, though still connected with the nature which is the source of itself, becomes capable of independent existence and may go and come as it pleases through the numberless gateways of consciousness. For the transcendent personality, all walls are doors, and the whole world is a gate. This is the secret of Zen, which reveals how differently the East and the West view the mystery of life. The Occidental, seeking for salvation, has been taught that the gate which leads to eternal life is small and narrow, difficult to find. The Zen priest believes that the gate which leads to eternal life is so broad that it is no gate at all. It is everywhere. All life is forever flowing through it. It is the gateless gate. Man cannot find it because he cannot realize that space itself is the doorway to eternity. He is looking for a small door through life when life itself is the doorway. The transcendent personality goes and comes through the gateless gate, gradually revealing through the life he lives, the life that is living him. For the purposes of meditation and realization, you should now attempt the gentle contemplation of the structure of the transcendent being. Realize in terms of freedom. Think not of life that is limited by state or estate, but rather of life lived in space. It may not be possible for you to travel physically to all parts of the world, or to read all of the books in the world, or to master all of the arts and sciences of the world in one lifetime, or even in many lifetimes. Yet we can always and forever move freely to and fro across the world. We may abide with all learning. We may sense through appreciation all of the learned accomplishments of man. Otherwise stated, we may abide eternally in the presence of the desire. This likewise is the mystery of the Sufi, the Persian mystic who, seated quietly in meditation, transfers his consciousness from his mortal personality to his transcendent personality, and by this means releases himself into the greater sphere of the mystic world. Motive. Now comes a very vital and important consideration, motive. If man seeks release for motives of escape, he fails utterly. The rose garden of Sati is not for those who are merely tired and weary and discouraged, rebels against the four walls of their little rooms. The rose garden is for the one who loves the roses. It is fulfillment and not escape. It is opportunity, not evasion. The transcendental sphere is not for those who would run away from living, but for those who would hasten forth toward life. It is hard to describe the difference in motives, but once they are experienced, the differences are obvious. The element of ulterior motive is involved, that certain deceit about many of our impulses, which are inspired by a phase of selfishness, or self-pity, or egotism, or even ambition. A textbook on the art of Chinese poetry explains the matter very simply. 3 manners of men attempt to write poetry. The first and lowest of these composes rhymes to sell, and his motive is profit. He can never become a true poet. The second composes his lyrics to impress others with his superior abilities, or in the hope that they will advance him in reputation or preferment. His motives are egotism and ambition, and he can never be a poet. The third class, and their number is comparatively small, are impelled only by the universal impulse of beauty. Poetry writes itself through them. Desiring neither profit nor fame, but moved by an irresistible impulse to express poetry, they alone are the poets. They have no personal motive, but a universal motive possesses them. It is the joy of beauty to reveal itself. Likewise, it is the joy of the transcendent personality merely to be. It moves back and forth through the world like a spinning shuttle, drawn where beauty and nobility abide, rejoicing in the contemplation of that which is noble and good. In the words of Jami, it is enough to be close to the beloved. The transcendent personality finds the beloved in space. The realization of these mysteries brings with it a very gentle mood, one still and peaceful, not sad or solemn. There is nothing grave or somber about the real. It is just that, in the presence of true joy, as in the presence of deep sorrow, the self is silent. Only that which feels little and lives superficially reacts boisterously. In your meditation, if you have understood correctly, you may meet your own transcendent personality as one you have long known. You will discover a very simple, gentle creature, slightly humorous, very human, childlike in simplicity, but old as the world in wisdom. As you open the gates, which lead outward into the spheres of your realization, this transcendent personality, bearing yourself with it, will move out through all the gateways, exploring, examining, experiencing, enjoying. Most of all, you will be with it in everything that it does. You will share its experiences. As time goes on, you will realize that this transcendent personality is actually yourself. All that it does, you will do. As you have built it, so now it builds you into itself. The transcendent personality is symbolized in Christian mysticism. It is truly the Christ in you, the hope of glory. Its creation in you is the second advent, and its coming of age within your consciousness is the true christening. In one of the apocalyptic Gospels, there is the story of the child Jesus and the birds. While playing, Jesus fashioned pigeons of clay and tossed them into the air. As he did so, they came to life and flew away into the sky. The transcendent personality is the magician of old, the Merlin of innumerable myths and legends. It possesses the magical power of bestowing life. It is the creator, the controller, the master of the genii. It is this transcendent being which releases the thought spirits that fly about it. Omar Khayyam pictures them as shadow shapes that come and go, the golden cage. In ancient times, there lived in China a great and powerful emperor who richly patronized the arts and crafts. He surrounded himself with painters, sculptors, and ingenious artisans who competed with each other to provide the emperor with extraordinary examples of their talents and skill. One of these craftsmen built a golden cage so intricate in its design and so perfect in its workmanship that the equal of it could not be found among all the treasures of the earth. The cage was fashioned in the likeness of a temple, its many roofs encrusted with jewels and its interior divided into numerous rooms with mechanical doors and gates. So delighted was the Son of Heaven at receiving this remarkable treasure that he immediately bestowed upon its designer, the jade button, and made him a prince of the empire. The emperor then called together his hunters and fowlers and bade them go forth with their nets to capture for him the strangest and most beautiful birds in the world. After many adventures which rivaled the strange tales in the Arabian Nights, the fowlers returned and presented themselves before the emperor. Each in turn recounted his exploits and presented the rare birds he had captured. At last, the chief of those who had gone forth brought as his offering the phoenix bird itself, which he had captured on the mountain of the moon. The emperor set up his golden cage in the palace garden, and in each of its rooms he placed one of the rare birds. He then ordered the throne to be brought out, and seating himself, he spent many hours contemplating the beautiful spectacle. While he was seated thus, surrounded by his mandarins and princes, a Taoist monk knocked at the palace gates. There was a mystery about this monk. He did not walk down the road, he came from the sky in a cloud. He was a spirit. Entering into the presence of the emperor, the monk seated himself with dignity and inquired about the golden cage. The emperor explained what had occurred. The old man sadly shook his head and discoursed in this manner. "O great majesty, set not this example for your people. Release the birds and destroy the cage." The emperor was displeased and astonished. He ordered the sage to explain himself. The monk then continued, "You, O Son of Heaven, are the symbol of righteousness to all that live within your domain. You are the model man. Your actions are the laws of your empire. Your conduct is the rule for right and wrong. Great is your responsibility because all must look to you as to the source of common good." This cage, built in the form of a temple, is a threefold mystery. First of all, it is the world with its many rooms within which all life is imprisoned. In the second place, this cage is China, the middle kingdom of the world. And you, O Emperor, and all your glittering court are the imprisoned birds. Their bright plumes are your robes of state, and the phoenix is your very self. Your palaces are prisons, your temples are cages, your powers are nets which catch yourself. In the third place, this golden cage is your mortal nature. And these little feathered things are the dreams and hopes which are imprisoned within the very bondage of yourself. All that you have learned of poetry and music and art, all the beauties which you have come to understand and appreciate and comprehend, are held prisoners within the cage of your mortal consciousness. O Emperor, release them all, and in releasing them, release yourself. Hold nothing captive. If you keep these birds in their gilded cage, they will cease to sing. Each in turn will pine away and die. It was not the purpose of life that it should be imprisoned or bound, and the one who keeps these birds in the cage will destroy them, and in the end destroy himself. You have found joy in capturing the birds. Now find the greater joy, the truly imperial privilege of releasing them. As he finished speaking, the old monk drew his robes about himself and disappeared in the very presence of the emperor. The emperor, himself a scholar, realized that the being who had appeared in the robes of the monk was no ordinary mortal but a celestial creature, the heavenly guardian of the birds. And as heaven had directed, so the Son of Heaven obeyed. He ordered all of the cage doors to be opened so that the imprisoned birds might fly back to the sky. Then he took the cage to the mountains and left it with all of the doors open, setting aside the place as a sanctuary for the birds. As the years passed, many of the birds returned to the cage and built their nests in it. And when the emperor was tired with problems of state, he would go out and climb the mountains to stand for hours watching the birds that flew in and out through the open doors of the cage. At the end of his life, he wrote a poem describing the understanding that had come to him from the contemplation of this mystery. The story explains itself, yet it tells much more than might first be understood. We live in a world which each of us in his own way has the impulse to dominate. We desire to capture life within the nets of will and thought. We measure success in terms of dominion. We feel that we are great in the measure that we possess. These reactions and impulses are entirely contrary to the contemplative life, yet the attitudes involved are so subtle and insidious in their operation that we learn our mistakes only after lifetimes of error. The difficulty with so-called spiritual ambition is the limitation which it inevitably imposes upon the free motion of life. As a concrete illustration, assume that all honest and sincere persons desire truth. Each in his own way seeks to capture the real, yet each seeker consciously or unconsciously thwarts his own ends. He does this by imposing the limitations of his own ignorance upon the very reality which he seeks to discover. Student number 1 destroys truth by declaring that one must practice yoga to discover it. Student number 2 destroys truth by affirming that he can discover the real through the intensive study of chemistry. Student number 3 destroys truth by taking mathematics as the key to universal knowledge. Student number 4 destroys truth by maintaining that it can be discovered by the practice of austerities. Student number 5 destroys truth by insisting that reality can be achieved through pilgrimage. Student number 6 destroys truth by declaring that understanding can be won through contact with holy relics. Student number 7 destroys truth by maintaining that it can be discovered in books. And student number 8 destroys truth by denying that it can be discovered in books. Each in his own way follows along the lines of his own endeavors and tries to capture eternity with the instruments of his own opinions, demanding that truth be what he expects it to be. Unconsciously, he sets himself up as a judge over the unknown, while in his ignorance he takes the attitude that could be reasonable only if he were all-knowing. It does not follow that reality is not to be achieved through meditation, or through study, or through mathematics, or through the practice of austerities. Each grows according to his own understanding. But as theology has corrupted religion, so formulas have corrupted philosophy. The doctrine of the transcendent personality assumes that the quest for reality is not a formularized attempt, but a spontaneous adventure in consciousness. There is no need for prodding the consciousness toward the quest for the overself. Man's spiritual nature is not a lazy schoolboy who must be browbeaten into a state of learning. It is the impulse of the self to flow toward the real. There is no need to stimulate this impulse. All that is necessary is to remove the artificial impediments and obstacles set up by the chemistry of the physical personality. As the bird flies from the cage when the door is open because the bird belongs to the air, so consciousness flies to the real when the cage of material limitation is opened. Meditation and the transcendent personality. In meditation, the transcendent personality is first visualized as born in the aura of the heart. Here it remains seated in contemplation of the law. As realization increases, the transcendent personality ascends along the course of the vagus nerve to the brain. Here it seats itself upon the 1,000-petaled lotus, the aura of the pineal gland. As the disciple proceeds, his personal consciousness mingles with that of the transcendent personality, with the result that the center of awareness ascends likewise to the brain and mingles with the transcendent personality to form the transcendental being. A simple example of this power of consciousness to localize or directionalize is the mystery of pain. Pain is a process of becoming acutely aware of a condition. The consciousness localizes itself in the area of distress and participates in the condition which it observes. The same is true in the contemplation of the transcendent being. Consciousness localizes itself in the heart, and later in the brain, and participates in the realization of the transcendent being. Realization as conduct. The degree of realization which the student achieves in the studies of the mystical can be determined in part by his reactions toward the exquisite and the fine. If he still prefers the bric-a-brac with which the uninformed surround themselves to the dignity of the blank wall, it is evident that realization is lacking. Take a man into an art gallery and ask him to point out the picture that he likes best. It will then be possible to tell the degree of his understanding. It will not be a measure of his technical knowledge of art, but of his internal reaction to the pictorial. Study the habits of human beings, and most of all, your own habits. By observing your reactions and reflexes, you can determine with certainty whether what you fondly believe to be spiritual expansion is merely an intellectual conception. Realization as conduct is the performing of truth. Realization as observation is the perceiving of truth. Realization as appreciation is the enjoyment of truth. Realization as speech is the utterance of truth. Realization as meditation is the contemplation of truth. Realization as veneration is the acceptance of truth in a spiritual mystery. Discipline as truth is obedience to the law, and sight as truth is the discovery of reality in form, line, color, and composition. Thus, we have a measure of checking to make sure that our realization is not illusory. If we are honest with ourselves, we know the degree of actual growth which we have accomplished. We know, without being told, the degree to which our tempers have subsided and our irritabilities have been subdued. We know the measure of our honesty and the degree of our integrity, at least approximately. If after several years of metaphysical study, these temperamental qualities have not changed markedly for the better, we are not studying correctly, regardless of what others may say or how good our memories have become. We have no real understanding unless our lives are better in practical terms. We have a poor memory indeed if we cannot remember the laws of life. If memory does not sustain its continuity so that the thing remembered becomes the thing done, little has been gained. A flowing of understanding into action as truth within the individual is released through realization. Let it be understood as impelling to conduct identical with its own nature. Practice the disciplines of the law. Know the law in the motion of your thinking. Feel the law in the quality and directing of your emotions. Express the law through the rhythm and coordination of your actions. During periods of meditation, practice simply at first and later with greater diversity of application, the experience of the law. Place before you on the table a simple but significant object, preferably something small and fine, something that you greatly prize. During the process of realization, and with the consciousness rather than with the mind, extend your hand and pick up the object. Observe this simple motion. As your realization increases, the action of picking up an object will become symbolical of the entire development of your consciousness. You will find that the impulse will slowly change from a muscular reflex to a motion rich with meaning and rhythm, impelled by definite understanding, clearly purposed, and executed with exquisite grace. As your understanding increases, the motion toward picking up the object will become slower and slower until, like the Zen monk, you will be able to accomplish the action without movement by realization alone. Philosophically, this is immovable motion. The object will be picked up by realization. This does not mean that the physical object will be levitated or will be carried to the person by mental power or any physically miraculous means. It implies, rather, that the reality of the object, the significance, and the purpose, which are its real self, will be picked up by the consciousness of the meditating individual without actually being moved at all. As realization extends throughout the departments of life, the simple act of picking up something will become symbolic of all motions. First, it will be beautified. A grace and harmony will be conferred upon action, and gradually coarse action will practically cease, all action being performed within realization. Illumination. To the mystic, the word illumination means inward enlightenment. As the sun lights the physical world and sustains all life with its energies, so the self, the spiritual sun, lights the inner world of spirit and preserves with its power the spiritual aspirations and ideals of mankind. Many are the popular misconceptions about the metaphysical significance attached to the word illumination. Illumination is not to be interpreted as some kind of an external experience. It is an entirely natural consequence of living an enlightened life. Illumination does not confer perfection, nor does it bestow a sudden extension of spiritual powers. Rather, it is a kind of dawning within the self, the beginning of a greater light, the aurora of Jakob Boehme. Illumination should never be interpreted as an acceptance into some elite body of initiated adepts, nor as an introduction into some arcane storehouse of secret lore. It has no association with fantastic pageantries, robed figures, priests and altars, soul flights, or similar absurdities so often suspected by the uninformed. Illumination is simply a process of awakening, of opening one's eyes, lifting another veil, opening another door, and looking toward the face of truth. It is the consciousness, having penetrated a little farther into the wonders of living. There is no cause for pride in illumination. If anything, the illumined student becomes more gentle and more humble, but there is no groveling humility. The disciple approaches truth because it is his birthright. He neither demands nor supplicates. He obeys the law, fits himself to receive light, and the light comes. Illumination is not a single experience marked by an abrupt transition from a state of ignorance to a state of wisdom. It is a series of related experiences, a series of spiritual discoveries. There will be moments that seem more radiant than others, but the whole experience will extend over a period of many lives. Growth is a sequence of unfoldment, an orderly procedure marked by the gradual increase of internal light. The child in school struggles heroically with the mystery of the multiplication table. To him, it is a mystery, and his mind is seeking to grasp the elements and principles which underlie the theory of multiplication. Weeks pass before the processes are mastered, and then the child suddenly realizes that it understands the workings of the multiplication table. No longer is there a mystery. The problem has been mastered. A secret inward flush of victory follows, a feeling that now the whole world is conquered. There is a new sense of strength and a new determination to attack other problems and to solve them. The flash of understanding in the young student's mind, which solved the mystery of the multiplication table, was a sort of illumination. It was consciousness becoming aware, Some light flowing into the fumbling mind revealed the mystery. In the schoolboy's flash of understanding, there is something spiritual and mystical. If that inner light had not come, he would have studied in vain. And without understanding, learning is useless. Neither would he expect his new understanding to become a universal panacea for ignorance. What he does find out, and soon, is that after mastering the principles of multiplication, he must learn the rules of division. Here he is confronted with new principles and new procedures. Once more, he must grope for the laws, and again he must find them within himself. A little enlightenment does not bestow immunity from future effort, nor does it promise peace and security in some psychic summerland. There is nothing impractical about mysticism. The difficulty is that many impractical persons seek refuge in mysticism without making any effort to correct their own shortcomings. We have learned that realization is a gradual extension of universal energy through the personality of the human being. Also, we have learned that in order to become enlightened, we must identify the personal consciousness with this universal force, then we may consciously participate in it and be moved by it as it moves through us. Wherever there is a point of contact between personal consciousness and universal consciousness, there is an extension of the personal consciousness. This extension is properly called illumination. As two electric wires brought together will produce a spark at their point of junction, so the meeting of the lesser and the greater selves is always accompanied by a temporary expansion of the lesser self. This flash of energy is interpreted through the personality of the human being in terms of the sudden extension of awareness. Something sought for is suddenly found, something desired is suddenly felt. Illumination always takes the form of solution, solving the problem most imminent to the self. The composer with his unfinished symphony, the artist with his unfinished canvas, the poet with his unfinished verses, and the scientist with his unfinished experiments. Each of these is confronted with a problem. Each has gone as far as he can proceed unaided. Having exhausted the resources of conscious personal knowledge, each is groping for a solution. It may require days, months, or even years to complete the unfinished task. Without realizing it, each of these men is waiting for a miracle. Only a revelation, only some mystical extension of consciousness can make possible the completion of the work. Then the light comes. How, no man knows. When, no man knows. Why, no man knows. We do know, however, that effort is rewarded with accomplishment. That which we earnestly desire and honestly strive after will come. We may see the answer as in a dream. It may flash into our minds. It may leap out at us in the motion of the millstream, in the ripples of a pool, or in the flight of a bird. The clue may come from the thoughtless words of a friend, the notion of some mere acquaintance. But within the reason, there is a little burst of awareness. The whole body and mind thrill with the acute knowledge that the answer is known, the solution is found. The experience of genius bears ample testimony that without consecration and perseverance, there can be no illumination. It is a reward for effort, not a substitute for effort. The philosophic life is in itself the noblest of all the arts. To live well is the supreme test of wisdom. It is impossible to perfect living without illumination. It is only in those moments of contact, during which the self is revealed, that the purpose of life can be more adequately realized. There can be no enlightened living without a realization of the reason for living. This reason cannot be supplied by the intellect, nor can it be discovered by the senses. The true reason for our existence can be found only through communion with the self. Only the self knows its own purposes. As personal beings, we are merely shadows cast by the self. As mortal creatures, we are the instruments by which the self accomplishes its purposes. Illumination comes when the instrument begins to discover the reason for which it was fashioned. Modern psychology has invented the term mystical experience to explain the mystery of illumination. Havelock Ellis, in summarizing the effect upon his life, which was produced by a mystical experience occurring to him, wrote in substance, "After this experience, nothing seemed to matter anymore. Everything was so supremely right, so entirely as it ought to be, that no longer was there any space for doubts, concern, or dissatisfaction." Havelock Ellis had glimpsed the law. For one brief second, he had looked out through the window of his personal self into the greater world that lay beyond. Light had come within. The mood could not be sustained. In a fraction of a second, it was gone, but the consequences of that mood were profound and lasting. No matter what he might say, no matter what others might say to him, no matter what conclusions might be reached by the 50 jarring sects, Havelock Ellis was sustained by a personal experience. Others argued, he knew. Others wondered, hoped, and feared, but he had experienced a certainty. He could not convey that certainty to any other living creature. If others ridiculed or disapproved, he could not confer his understanding or convince them. The certainty was his own, but he could not share it. He could state it, but he had no power to force conviction. To the earnest student, the desire for illumination may become a serious handicap. If you are too conscious of the ends you desire, you may become neglectful of the means by which you hope to achieve those ends. To exist from day to day longing to be illuminated is to fall almost certainly into the illusions of wishful thinking. If the longings stimulate the imagination, it will soon bring about pseudo-psychic experiences which to the hopeful and imaginative soul assume the proportions of cosmic enlightenment. Illumination can never come until the causes for it have been definitely established. It is the crowning effort. Do not wait for it. Do not hope for it. Do not wonder about it. Do not fear that it will not come. Develop realization, normalize and beautify life. And illumination will be the normal and natural consequence, not as a single episode, not one tremendous burst of enlightenment, but a steady release and increasing flow of understanding into and through the lower faculties of the reason. It has often been pointed out that tension and effort are detrimental to spiritual progress. This is especially true in so abstract and sensitive a subject as illumination. The story is told of a Zen monk studying in Kamakura who practiced the disciplines daily for 20 years in order to earn for himself the merit of illumination. At the end of that time, he was still untouched by the flame of the self. Discouraged at last, he climbed to the top of a tall pagoda, determined to cast himself off. He had given up all hope. Having come to the final resolution and being utterly resigned, he flung himself from the pagoda. As he fell, realization came, and so great was the enlightenment that manifested through him that he landed unhurt at the foot of the tower. He immediately rushed to the abbot for an explanation of this phenomenon. The old man listened gravely to the account and then nodded his approval and understanding. "My son," he explained, "for these 20 years you have tried to force the real. You have dominated that which will not obey the orders of any living thing. You have desperately striven to discover that which no man can discover. Truth must discover you. At last, having failed in all your efforts to grasp the formless aspect of light, you became utterly discouraged. You gave up. You relaxed. You tried no longer. In your very desperation, you came to a state of peace. Life was purposeless without reality. You no longer desired to live. For an instant, all of your psychic organisms were calm. And in that instant, the 20 years of your discipline bore fruit. The light came. You were no longer plagued with the intensity of your own desires, that which could come only during desirelessness. Detachment is truly a part of the mystic disciplines. Too many beginners in metaphysical matters are longing after liberation. Too few are performing the disciplines of liberation. There is no liberation except through realization and illumination. These are the only escapes from the wheel of the law, yet they are not really methods of escape. More correctly, they are the outgrowing of the limitations by which most mortals are afflicted. As birth is the only entrance into the physical life, so enlightenment is the only entrance into the spiritual life. However, we must not desire too intensely after spiritual release, or we shall cheat ourselves out of some part of physical experience. For the philosopher, all things in good time. Without undue haste and without undue delay, without regret and without anxiety, the mind established in wisdom flows toward the real. Under such conditions, illumination is as natural as life itself. And only when it is entirely natural is it real. So-called illumination produced in any other way and by any other means can be but hallucination. The disciple can protect himself in one regard. He can constantly ask himself whether the spirituality which he believes he has achieved is consistent with what he knows about his own spiritual integrity. If he seems to know more than he is, to be wiser than his virtues, to be more advanced than the standard of his thinking and living, then he certainly is deceiving himself. His progress is not real but imaginary, and he should set himself immediately to the task of correcting conditions before delusions further confuse him. We are not worthy of enlightenment merely because we desire it, but only when we have won it, and there are so few who are willing to earn. The masses expect nature to bestow its greatest gifts regardless of worthiness. The contrast between the intellectual and the mystical viewpoint is exemplified by the meeting of Confucius and Lao Tse. Confucius was a man possessing the highest mental and reasoning powers. Not only was his mind profound, but he retained to the end the delightful qualities of humor and curiosity that revealed intellectual superiority. His thought was profound, gentle, and dignified. He sought to educate China and to release through the Chinese consciousness the noble traditions which had descended through centuries of scholarship and culture. But Confucius was not a mystic. His spiritual nature never escaped the conventions of thought. He never denied mysticism, but admitted simply and honestly that he was unqualified to indulge in its abstractions. He honored the mystic, studied the mystical books, and even wrote commentaries upon some of them. His knowledge was encyclopedic, but it is doubtful if he ever experienced that conscious extension into participation with infinites which the mystic terms illumination. This does not mean that Confucius was unenlightened, and here is a fine distinction. The trained mind, properly disciplined, may arrive at the same conclusion that the mystic approaches through realization. The difference lies in the degree of conscious participation in the known. The intellectual approaches truth as something possessing form and dimension, outside of his own nature. But the mystic approach to truth is that of consciousness finding itself as formless and dimensionless reality. Lao Tse, in his life, his teaching, and his personality, was completely the mystic. He moved through his world untouched by the literalisms of life. His scholarship was entirely within himself. He contacted the literature and art of his time without being in any way caught or entangled in the maze of their intellectual or emotional grandeur. He was in this world but never of it, dwelling always apart in the distant heights of his own realization. Somewhat older in years than Confucius, he was far older in spiritual understanding. The mystical difference in age has been adroitly adapted by Taoist painters in depicting these two great men, as is illustrated by a fine old Chinese painting. It bears the title Lao Tse, and the infant Confucius, the great Taoist saint, is sitting in the shadow of a great rock from which springs the ragged, twisted form of a storm-swept pine. Lao Tse, represented as an aging man wrapped in a somber mantle, is gazing down with the benign serenity of a wise and loving parent at the babe he is holding in his arms. Confucius, with the intent, frank, and trusting expression so often seen on the faces of intelligent children, nestles securely in the old man's arms. The whole conception is noble and meaningful. It is unlikely that there is any historical foundation for the picture. It is a symbolical representation of the parenthood of realization as compared to intellectual accomplishment. Much has been made of the traditional meeting of Confucius and Lao Tse on the steps of the library of the Shu. It was on this occasion that Confucius described the spiritual accomplishment of Lao Tse as being compared to a great dragon twisting and turning in space, flashing through clouds which obscured the mental lives of normal human beings. The dragon soared upward through all the states of being, and then streaked downward into the very depths of matter, a great immeasurable spirit ascending and descending at will, flying free in space, unlimited by any mortal restraint. He could admire this free spirit, but he could not bring his own personal experience into rapport with so cosmic a consciousness. To the Taoist, the dragon represents illumination. It conveys to his mind the strange powers of the real. It is the only creature in the Taoist mythological system that is entirely self-sustained, inhabiting the great field of Tao itself. The dragon is space's consciousness. It dwells in the absolute, moving back and forth with perfect freedom in the limitless vistas of reality. Space, or Tao, is eternally moved by the tides of law. Within it are all shapes, all forms, all motions. This mystery is expressed by representing universal extension as a sea of currents and energies filled with nebulous whirling and patterns designed to express immense cosmic processes. Here, self-nourished and unique, one without a second, dwells the dragon, expressing in its form the infinite courage of realization which sustains itself in the mystic ocean of the universal self. Lao Tse perceived instantly with mystical penetration that Confucius was incapable of the mystical comprehension. The men met, performed the formalities, conversed for a little time, and parted. Lao Tse returned to the gray walls of his library, and Confucius to the secluded grove where he discoursed with his disciples. There is no record of any opinion that Lao Tse may have expressed as the result of his meeting with the greatest scholar of his time. But Confucius described to his disciples his impressions of Lao Tse. He was profoundly affected, and sought earnestly to find some spirit of mysticism within himself. He had the greatness to recognize greatness, but not the realization to share in the lofty speculations of the initiated mystic. This brings to consideration two important Taoist doctrines concerning illumination. The first is courage, and the second is sufficiency. Courage is understood to mean that strength of purpose by which the consciousness steadfastly approaches the real. Realization. The consciousness steadfastly approaches the real. Here realization must support the quest. It is not sufficient to desire truth. It is necessary to strengthen desire with the courage of conviction. Truth brings not only liberation, but undreamed of responsibilities to the self. That which is realized becomes the absolute law of living. There can be no departure from inward reality. Once man knows, he must do, or else his knowledge will torture him. Failure to think, to act, and to live that which is realized, or any effort on the part of the lower nature to compromise, realization, produces a desperate conflict within the life. It is an axiom that that which is realized is naturally performed. But we must remember that for the average person, realization is imperfect, and the moments of conscious extension are separated from each other by relapses into what may be termed human interludes. Only the most highly evolved mystic, who has devoted many lives to the unfoldment of the mystical disciplines within himself, can continuously maintain his realization. The intermittent flashes of greatness, termed by the Taoists the blinking of the dragon's eye, result in a material condition requiring a high measure of personal courage. There must first be the courage and dedication to depart from the errors of other men and to devote the life to a reality which is beyond the understanding of associates and friends. Then there must be the courage to face the inevitable failures of good intentions. There must be realization deep and true enough to accept these backslidings without emotional intemperance. There must be no self-condemnation, no interludes of remorse, no periods of despair. Realization must be true enough to sustain the consciousness and tranquility throughout success and failure, which alternate in the life of the disciple. To lose tranquility in what some feel to be the right aims of self-censure is again to fall into error. As surely as there must be no spiritual ambition, so there must be no spiritual remorse. The quest for the real must become a continuous, gentle effort. All things in nature will accomplish realization in the fullness of time. Nothing can hasten law. It is its own speed. Nothing can be delayed beyond the limitations imposed by the immaturity which is intrinsic to all mortal creatures. The second Taoist doctrine concerning illumination emphasizes the necessity for sufficiency. The doctrine creates itself, sustains itself, abides by itself, moves impelled by its own nature, and has no home but space. This attacks the fundamental human impulse toward dependency. Even religion subtly inculcates a doctrine of dependency. Man is ever searching for a strength outside of himself upon which he can cast his burdens. Many persons studying mysticism are seeking for some source of security to which they can turn in time of trouble. This insufficiency has no place in a doctrine of realization. The dragon soul abides only in the shadow of eternity itself. The illuminated consciousness must be completely self-sustaining, unaffected by any sense of aloneness. As enlightenment increases, the desire to share it increases, but with this desire comes the realization that it is impossible to share the real. Realization is an inward experience, which can come only to those who have won it in their own right. It cannot be conferred. The impulses which realization bestows upon the personality will not be understood by others less developed. Lao Tse dwelt in the old libraries, wandering like a ghost up and down through the passageways, surrounded by thoughts of other men, yet untouched by those thoughts. In like manner, the mystic, though bound physically to the life of his world, must understand the freedom of his inner life, or he will be very much alone. A few will venerate him from afar, but none will understand him. Jesus, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, was alone. His disciples could not keep one vigil with him. Their realization could not go with him into the presence of the Father. Realization brings with it sufficiency, but unless the growth toward it be entirely natural and unaffected by ambition, the disciple will find it difficult to maintain sufficiency without leaning on some error for support. His realization will not be continuous enough in its earlier stages to prevent some conflict between the personal and impersonal phases of his life. He must recognize and realize the difference between freedom and aloneness. The man who is alone has a certain freedom which he often fails to appreciate. The man who is free finds in his freedom an aloneness that is often difficult to bear. If such conflict arises, it must be met by realization. When realization is highly developed, time and place cease. Time and place are intimately involved in the pattern of relationships. When time and place have been absorbed by realization, then aloneness and distance are gone. As Confucius said of Lao Tse's spirit, realization moves back and forth, up and down, in and out. The interlude of aloneness lies in the critical amount of adjustment between personal and universal consciousness. Universal consciousness cannot be alone because it is part of everything. It is a participation in life which forever precludes any acceptance of isolation. But this realization is not easily achieved. It is because of certain great problems such as these that I have so carefully emphasized the necessity of developing realization by gentle and normal means. If the development be entirely correct, the motion of the consciousness will be so gradual and so normal that these abrupt interruptions will be passed through almost without incident. Universality will increase to the same degree that the personality decreases, with a corresponding decrease in stress and strain. If for any reason the effort at development is forced, and the flow of consciousness is interrupted by mental or emotional complexes, then such problems as aloneness will inevitably manifest themselves. If this occurs, you should slow your forward motion and gather up the loose ends which enthusiasm or spiritual ambition has caused you to overlook. Proceed no further in the extension of some one part of your consciousness until your realization is sufficient to assure the continuity and normalcy of your living. Not to make such correction will result in misery and temporary failure. Your aloneness may cause you to rush ahead into unwise attachments or to falsely glorify as a spiritual virtue your sense of isolation. The latter course of action produces the hermit, the recluse, and the fanatic, who believe that there is some spiritual virtue in frustration. Such a course of action renders consciousness less suitable for normal realization, and usually ends in a stalemate. From the foregoing, it will become more evident how delicate are the adjustments which are necessary to a normal spiritual growth. When we realize that most students of mysticism are not even aware of the necessity for these adjustments, it is not difficult to understand why most of them turn out to be impractical and intolerant. It is not the failure of mysticism itself, but the failure of the disciple to bring to the subject an adequate background of general knowledge and normal viewpoint. Each must protect himself with his own understanding against what the unbeliever has rather appropriately termed sickly mysticism. It is unfortunate that the world has been trained to accept as virtuous traits of character which are not necessarily superior. The Hindu holy man sitting on a bed of spikes gains a certain popular sanctity because he endures physical discomfort for his belief. It is perfectly proper to respect his sincerity, but not to admire his understanding. The same attitude is appropriate toward the Christian saints and religious leaders. To shorten one's life and to multiply one's sufferings may reflect devotion, but certainly such actions should not be set up as standards for normal spiritual development. The intention may be right, but the realization that is the true spiritual development must be comparatively slight. It is much more appropriate to the ideals of mysticism to symbolize growth by a beautiful, spontaneous, happy unfoldment, like that of the opening flower, than to do so by an example of cruelty which would accomplish heaven by afflicting its own body with a heartless despotism. So be not deceived by the standards of spirituality which others set up. Do not try to emulate the lives of others, even though they may have a high reputation for sanctity. Search for realization associated with beauty, gentleness, peace, and simple dignity. Spiritual progress is not to be achieved by any creed of cruel action or by the heartless inhibition of normal impulses. This realization is your contemplation of the mystery of illumination. Try to experience inwardly a sense of gentle awakening. Go out into the dawn and meditate upon the daily awakening of the world. See how the darkness gives way to a dim light which slowly spreads across the surface of the earth. Observe how this light gradually brings into life all the sleeping wonders of nature. Then the rising of the sun, its own rays reaching into the very consciousness of living creatures, until each stirs and again takes up the tasks of the day. There is no conflict, no struggle. There is light in the world and the acceptance of light as natural, as normal as the simple awakening of that which has known light and darkness before. Illumination is a dawn within the self. The light of the Spirit brings into life the innumerable aspects of realization. An empire of effort awakens, and all life continues its search for peace. As the Buddhist disciplines lead to nirvana, or absorption into the universal self, and the yoga philosophy teaches a union with universals through samadhi, so the Taoist doctrines of China have as their goal the identification of consciousness with Tao, the supreme principle of life. To the Chinese understanding, there are two modes or conditions of Tao, its relative and its absolute aspects. Every living creature at every step of its evolution participates to some degree in the mystery of Tao. This participation is relative adjustment, the partaking of Tao. In distinction to this continuous process of adjustment is the ultimate identification with Tao. All growing results in growth. All growth ends in Tao. As absolute Tao is beyond definition, it cannot be contemplated by the intellect. It cannot even be attained by the mind. It may be symbolized, set up as a goal, recognized as an ultimate, yet it eludes definition. Tao is. This fact is the supreme reality which the mind is capable of framing. What Tao is can only be experienced through the mystical disciplines of realization and illumination. When Lao Tse departed from China, riding on his green water buffalo, he stopped for a short time with the keeper of the northern gate of the Great Wall. It was on this occasion that he compiled the Tao Te Ching, his only literary production. This brief thesis, containing only 5,000 characters, is the foundation of all Taoist metaphysical speculation. It is principally concerned with an effort to expound that which is knowable by the human intellect concerning the mystery of Tao. Having delivered this writing to the guardian of the northern gate, Lao Tse rode off into the mysterious depths of the Gobi Desert and was never again seen by mortal eyes. He left behind him the mysterious symbol of Tao as the law, the way, the means, and the end, one comprehensive idea that embraces both the seeker and the sought, the means and the end. We live in Tao, we desire Tao, we attempt to understand Tao, we strive to become Tao, and at the end of all seeking, we are Tao. It is evident that so mystical a speculation cannot be grasped by the mind which has been trained to the contemplation of formal and tangible matters. We lack the equipment to enable us to visualize in the abstract. To understand, we must bestow form and dimension. To formalize or limit Tao is a philosophical impossibility. Therefore, it remains like the mysterious swirling clouds, a force and a principle realized yet not realized. Its immanence is recognized as necessary, but unrecognizable in its very nature. Buddha and Socrates both refused to attempt a definition of absolute being. Each gave the same reasons. In the first place, it was impossible, and in the second place, even were it possible, such definition would not be useful to the evolution of human consciousness. The mind, groping with an abstraction beyond its comprehension, will inevitably fall into error. It would invest reality with the limitations and disfigurements of its own imperfect perspective. The mind would then worship these distortions as realities and lapse into error. What the intellect cannot understand, it misunderstands. Religious misunderstandings are especially unfortunate, even tragic. They will affect every other part of the life, reducing integrity and preventing normal growth on the various planes or levels of living. It is not wise, therefore, that the average disciple attempt in any way to anticipate ultimates. His search for Tao should result in a series of personal discoveries. Each new aspect of Tao should dawn upon him. It should come as a beautiful experience in the personal extension and impersonal awakening of the self. There should be no preconceived opinions as to that which lies beyond. There should be open-mindedness, absolute willingness to face truth as it is, and to rejoice in the glory of things as they are. Tao cannot be theologized. It cannot even be taught, but it can be known. The disciplines of meditation and realization are not statements of Tao per se, rather they are an invitation to the Taoist life. They will gradually lead toward the real, but cannot be understood as definitions of reality. Earlier you have had the attempt to explain something of the mystery of the transcendental being, how the spirit of the personality is separated from the grosser parts to become an eighth sense. The transcendental being is the bridge between the objective and the subjective parts of man. Across this bridge, the more refined parts of man may pass to and fro, but it is not strong enough to support the grosser aspects of the personality. In the Nordic mythology, the transcendental being is the Bifrost Bridge, the bridge of rainbows which connects Midgard, the abode of man, with Asgard, the abode of the heroes. Across this heroic bridge, Odin of the single eye passes to and fro. The other gods and goddesses of the mundane order frequently accompany him, all except Thor, the thunderer. Thor was of such gigantic structure and so heavy of stride that beneath his tread the bridge shook and threatened to collapse. This charming allegory is the story of the difference between the personality and its principles. Thor of the mighty hammer, the destroyer of giants, is the human mind, the objective intellect. The mind is the conqueror of the mundane world, but it is not allowed upon the Bifrost Bridge. The mind analyzes, criticizes, and divides. It is constantly given to opinions and attitudes. Its very processes shatter the subtle stuff of human aspiration. Soul power is too fragile in its early stages to bear the weight of mental criticism and intellectual analysis. Thus it is written in the Eastern classics that the mind is the slayer of the real. As the Minotaur wandered raging in the Cretan labyrinth, so the intellect roams the world, exploring, searching, affirming and denying, building up and tearing down, conquering and being conquered, living and dying according to the laws inherent in itself. As long as there is mind, there will be division. As long as there is division, intellect will contemplate and accept division. While intellect rules, there is discord. But when the self rules the intellect, there is order, relationship, pattern, and purpose. It is mind that has taught death, and according to the scriptures, death is the last great enemy. Death is a belief in limitation, a conception of existence based upon mental experience, and by which the eternity of life is denied. Though all the selves may come and go, may be born and die, the self is imperishable. There is no conflict between reality and time. The conflict is in the mind. Reality is timeless. There is no conflict in the self between good and evil. Evil is in the mind. Good is eternal. There is no conflict in the self between ignorance and wisdom. Ignorance is a conception of the mind. Wisdom is eternal. To perceive that the mind is the interposer of doubt, the very source of the impulse of negation, the root of fear, the origin of unbelief and disbelief, to discover through realization that weakness is not in the self but in the mind, is to emerge victorious from life's greatest battle. Armageddon is the war against the shadows that have been set up by thought. To refer again to our Nordic myths, in the last great day, the Gotterdammerung, the twilight of the gods, the heroic souls prepare themselves to do battle against the powers of darkness. And what are these powers? The armies of the shadow, the souls of the dead, wraiths riding in ships of mist, horrid apparitions loosed from the caves of hell, monsters from under the earth, deceivers, false witnesses and false prophets, a host of vagaries riding in the ship of fools. This is the pageantry of the lower mind, the mind which has filled the world with false doctrines, and then bound man with them, the mind which has filled the air with demons and the earth with shadows, the mind which has conjured up fearsome ghouls and then prostrated itself before the productions of its own fears. The struggle between the self and its lower selves, between realization and opinion, between illumination and thought. This is the last great war. Each must fight this battle within his own nature. Before he can proceed, he must emerge victorious from his battle with his own thoughts. It is a strange war, the strangest war of all. Man must fight without fighting. For if he opposes ignorance with any impulse of the will, his realization fades away and he is left helpless. His victory must be in the simple fact of knowing, which scatters the ghosts opposing him. There is no struggle or warfare between light and darkness. When light comes, darkness fades away. Man wins by the steadfastness of his light. His victory is a gentle attainment of truth. His enemy cannot strike back. Shadows and unrealities have no power except that which is bestowed upon them by one of the numerous attributes of ignorance. As ignorance ceases, the adversary is left powerless, but the ghosts do not return to their caverns and their grottos. All vanish together in the presence of the knower. The disciple must understand this without falling into further error. His realization of the unreality of the mundane order of life must not lead him into the illusion of denial. Thoughts cannot be destroyed by denying their existence or by refusing to accept them. There is not sufficient strength or courage in any man to impel him to think down the thoughts of his world. This is why so many reformers fail. They oppose one thought with another. They try to impose an intellectual formula upon an intellectual chaos, and their formula is torn to pieces by the mind of the world that can be conquered by realization alone. In the presence of wisdom, the world mind is powerless. Possibly, this is why the world persecutes its dreamers, its mystics, its seers, its sages, and its saints. It knows that they possess a power greater than all the scheming of man. The intellect, like the fabled Herod, would protect itself by destroying the firstborn powers of the soul. The philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, the doctrine of harmlessness, is centered about the one fundamental truth, the inevitable victory of soul power over physical power. Again, realization must direct the course of action. The mind has its functions and its purposes. It cannot be ignored or denied, nor its significance neutralized by a gesture. Thoughts have their place in the plan. It is realization that must put all things in their proper places. The impractical mystic, clinging to only part of the truth, develops cults of absolutism based upon the ignoring of the mind and its phenomena. This wrong is discovered only after years of mistaken effort. We cannot deny any aspect of life. We must understand, through illusion, whatever it may be. A concrete physical instance may help to clarify this difficult and delicate problem. Tyranny is evident in the affairs of men. Despots afflict their people, corrupt politicians exploit their states. Ambitious dictators lead their nations into ruin. To deny that such things are occurring is foolish. On the other hand, to accept the reality of tyranny, exploitation, and despotism is equally foolish. Where, then, is the middle ground of fact? How should a person, feeling the weight of the afflictions with which our material world is burdened, react to the conditions of his environment? The solution lies with his own inner adjustment. If his consciousness is dominated by the principle of intellect, he will accept the reality of the failure and seek to reform or oppose it. He can follow no other course for the reason that he has no other instrument of understanding with which to meet the problems. That is real to us which is similar to our own understanding. There can be no other standard of reality. If, however, through the development of realization and the practice of the philosophic disciplines, the disciple moves his inward foundation across the antaskarana, the bridge of consciousness, the world pattern changes because he brings a different degree of realization to that pattern. The unreality of tyranny, despotism, and exploitation is now accepted as a fact. From that time on, the destructive forces of the lower world can exercise no influence upon the enlightened self. Their significance slowly fades out. They cease, not because they have been argued down or reasoned through, but because there can be no place for them in the experience of one who has passed beyond the sphere of their influence. A Buddhist saint once wrote, "Men drown in water and live by breathing air. Fish drown in air and live by breathing the water." This is a symbolic effort to express the mystery of realization. A condition which is death to one order of life is security to another. Realization causes man to change the order of his life. The enlightened and illumined soul belongs to a race apart. He lives in a different element. Therefore, to him, the laws of life are different. He transcends the world by transcending the world thought in himself. When he accomplishes this, he fulfills the admonition of the Eastern classic, "Take the sword of right and slay the slayer." The next few pages bring the instructions to a close. It will be your responsibility to continue the practice of the disciplines. Beginning with thoughtfulness, you must preserve a continuity of effort which will ultimately lead you beyond the world of thought and into the sphere of union with the mystical principles of life. Always bear in mind the necessity for balancing and rationalizing each step of the way so that nothing impractical or unreasonable shall deflect the consciousness from its noble purpose. Be mystically thoughtful and thoughtfully mystical. Combine a gentle appreciation with the courage of continuous action. Permit nothing to move you from the foundations which you are building. Yet withal, retain as much as is possible of gentle human contact. Realize that wisdom brings you closer to the heart of things and sets up no artificial barriers against the free circulation of human relationships. Do not spend too great an amount of time attempting to visualize some nirvanic state at the end of effort. Do not dream of release as freedom desired because it is the end of striving. Remember that the means and the end are one. We shall never find peace apart from the quest for peace. Beyond us lie endless vistas of progress. The whole cosmos waits to be accomplished. Man's growing understanding and his unfolding consciousness go on in their ageless search for union with the immense principle which sustains all the mysteries of the world. It is not yet our time to contemplate finalities. The incomprehensible fascinates and intrigues, but cannot satisfy. Our greatest peace comes from the recognition of our present place in the plan. When we know that we are trying, when we have the solid assurance that according to our various lights we are earnestly seeking and sincerely practicing the disciplines, we enjoy what Aristotle called well-being. Right mindfulness is the direction of attention to those matters which are first in importance. Strive for a mood of mystic thoughtfulness, not merely intellectual analysis, but a kind of quickened appreciation which causes us to be attentive to the significance of living. There was once an old Chinese scholar who enjoyed the patronage of a certain mandarin. This mandarin, in a moment of generosity, presented the scholar with a bullock cart. Now a bullock cart is one of the slowest methods of transportation yet devised. The ambling ox never hastens his gait, but plods along only slightly more rapidly than the average man walks. The Chinese philosopher rode in the cart the first day, but thereafter walked ahead, leading the ox. When asked why he did not make use of the conveyance, the scholar replied that his newly acquired vehicle was destroying his perspective on life. Lapsing into a truly Taoist viewpoint, he explained himself thus: a journey, regardless of its length, is not a motion from place to place, but an experience in moving through space from place to place. In other words, man grows not as a result of arriving at his journey's end, but by the mystery of the journey itself. He learns most who travels slowly. The sage went on to describe the adventures of his daily travel. He observed the woods at the roadside and stopped to contemplate some small natural creature fulfilling its tasks according to the impulse of instinct. Every step of his journey was alive with living purpose. Each of the objects which attracted his attention was a sermon. Each embodied spiritual truth, and each bore witness to some phase of the divine law. To hasten was to be deprived of the privilege of contact with life. It was to place the journey upon a different footing. In the comfort of his ox cart, the sage could travel, but when he went on foot, he experienced. With true Oriental politeness, he compromised. He took the cart with him, but walked so that he might continue to experience his daily contact with life, and at the same time, might not evade the implication that he must also experience possession of the ox cart. To have rejected or returned the cart would have been, from the Taoist viewpoint, to avoid the responsibility of possession. There is a fine point in spiritual ethics in such a dilemma. Each student would have to solve the matter in his own way, but there is no virtue in rejection, and no virtue in the performance of error to please a friend. The most important lesson taught by the fable is that which relates to the simple journey of the day, to make the journey not because we are striving to cover a distance, but because we rejoice in a series of experiences, each of which is precious in itself. It is common in religion for the spiritual-minded to dream of the journey's end. This is a false dreaming. Rather, we should be attentive to all with which we come in contact along the way. Each day of living is an experience in mystical discipline, presenting new opportunities for realization, new evidence of the spiritual purpose that stands behind the worlds. The mystic is unfolding himself not because he is primarily aware of some specific goal, but because he is supremely happy in the joy of growing, and in the knowledge that he is fulfilling the destiny that was appointed to him at the beginning of all things. To preserve a normal viewpoint in troubled times demands a high appreciation of the dignity and significance of imminent. Do not become discouraged once you begin the disciplines. They must become as much a part of your life as eating or sleeping. They belong to you. They must be practiced from now on throughout time, not merely as a ritual but as a quality of yourself, with the same acceptance of them as is expressed by the natural processes of eating and digesting of food. After a time, you will no longer realize that you are practicing a discipline. It will be part of your life. You will instinctively include realization in all the modes and moods of your existence. It will be as natural to realize as to think, as normal to understand as to feel. Awareness and thoughtfulness will become part of you, and altogether your inward education will result in a great responsiveness to life, which is the basis of true greatness. Under such conditions, it will be impossible for you to determine with certainty where realization mingles with illumination, for each is a part of the other. You never will know the time when you transcend thought and rise into the mindless vistas of true spiritual apperception. Yet as you proceed, all of the transcendental processes which you are building up will manifest themselves, until from their blending and mingling will come the true enlightenment of the initiated sage. Most sublime of all is the mystic truth that long before illumination crowns your effort, you will have forgotten illumination. You will be so absorbed in the experiencing of God that, like the Sufi in his rapture, you will forget to be mindful of yourself. The time will never come when you will rapturously exclaim, "I am illuminated." You will never stand aside to marvel at your own superiority. You will never ponder thoughtfully as to whether you are ready for nirvana, nor will you ever ask yourself what lies beyond the world. As realization brings these great extensions of consciousness to you, you will be so perfectly conditioned to receive them that you will neither wonder nor be surprised. You will be neither glad nor sorry in the terms of human emotion. You will experience merely an extension of the law of cause and effect. Illumination will come because it is necessary. You will need it in order that you may continue to experience your participation in reality. The mystical disciplines are the natural human way to truth. They are available to all men, and each who attempts the living of them is rewarded according to his integrity and his continuity. As time finally mingles in the ocean of eternity, so all creatures who live in time finally will mingle with the one nature that abides in eternity. Our journey is from here to the forever along gentle roads of growth. It is our own lack of understanding that has made these roads difficult and has obstructed nature with 1,000 artificial hazards and predicaments. But as long as men remain, as long as humanity endures, the search for truth will be the same search. The means will be the same, and the end will be the same. The disciples of all ages shall assume the contemplative life, and through the harmless practice of realization seek union. As the closing realization, remember that we must be thoughtful through the years, not during the practice of a series of lessons, or even through a series of lives. Realization must go on until it achieves identity with the object of itself. Let your realization through all this time that simply, naturally, gently, normally, and happily, you are growing up through the many to the one, and that you are accomplishing this through the gradual processes of discovering as a series of joyous experiences the one in each of the many. Realization is the conscious understanding of the unity of life and of the unity of the living self with a deathless cause which abides in the innermost parts of the world. Be patient, and in all things be kind, and time and eternity will be patient and kind through you.